And perhaps it wasn't so simple in this matter. Creating the origin source of time was vastly different from mastering it. Emperor Juyun from back then, it wasn't that simple. Her aspirations were immense, probably beyond the imagination of outsiders. Moreover, the path she took was likely a dark and perilous one, untrodden by anyone. Even if she didn't succeed, she could still become the emperor of the Moro time and space. If he succeeded, then perhaps the Moro time and space of that time would have witnessed a being even more formidable than the Qixin, a true ruler of the stars. It's ultimately just a dream. With the fall of Emperor Juyun, fewer people would dare to tread that path, and that profound technique probably had been sealed away by Zhenling. It might be better for him to stick to his ultimate sword Dao path honestly. The 8th level emphasizes suppression, so the 9th level should focus on the path of slaughter. The sword Dao is fundamentally rooted in the essence of slaughter and cannot be overly conservative, or it would go against its nature. Slaughter. What constitutes the ultimate form of slaughter? Jian Wushuang's divine consciousness immersed itself in these thoughts. Having found a direction, he began to immerse himself in cultivation. Simultaneously, within Gong Miaoi's body, he continuously absorbed the profound mysteries of the sword Dao. Strangely enough, only now did he truly understand the sword Dao origin source within Gong Miaoi's body. Origins typically took the form of pillars. Even if it formed a spatial origin source, it would still be a three-dimensional shape. However, the sword path origin within Gong Miaoi's body looked more like a flat surface, like a piece of paper. Not only was the sword Dao mystery on its surface exceptionally active, this inconspicuous sword Dao origin source within Gong Miaoi's spatial origin source was quite extraordinary. It's time to enhance the divine body. Jian Wushuang heaved a sigh of relief. Just finding the direction had taken him tens of thousands of years. Fortunately, now that he had a direction, continuous contemplation would lead to improvement. Many cultivators spend countless epochs just searching for direction in their cultivation, but Jian Wushuang's progress was swift due to his massive accumulation. The next level of advancement depended on providence. In contrast, the improvement of the divine body was different. It required a short amount of time but demanded numerous treasures. Splash! In the sea of origin source, Jian Wushuang's divine body's illusion floated, surrounded by countless treasures. Void iron shards. Jian Wushuang grabbed a handful, and a powerful force began to enter his divine body. These void iron shards, sliced from an unknown source, contained terrifying power unrelated to material, pure energy. At this moment, the divine body began to swell. Just a piece of iron shard caused his body to expand 1,000-fold. Now it had reached 16,000-fold. White Junwang had warned him before. The enhancement of the divine body needed to be systematic. The precondition was a robust physical body capable of accommodating a stronger divine body. His physical body was impeccable, and the divine body had integrated with the boundless. The balance among the physical body, divine body, and origin source was maintained. Though he was a Tao Lord, his origin source had reached the level of a Tier 5 emperor. The only thing lacking was the explosive growth of the divine body. Previously, with the support of the beast god weapon and the heavenly demon technique, he could reach a divine body of 50,000-fold, already at its limit. In fact, he could completely skip the enhancement of the divine body. With the augmentation of the beast god weapon and the heavenly demon technique, he could already reach the limit of 50,000-fold. Relying solely on the divine body, he reached the threshold of the Tier 6 emperor. If he truly elevated the foundational divine body to 50,000-fold, it would be challenging for the current beast god weapon to empower the divine body. The heavenly demon technique would no longer have a part to play, could be considered dispensable. Instead, he could directly raise the divine body to 30,000-fold or even 50,000-fold. The foundation was the key. The beast god weapon had many advantages besides amplifying the divine body. It was not just as simple as enhancing the divine body. The divine body was the origin source of power. What Jian Wushuang lacked now was power. That power was meant to contend with the emperor for the sun and moon. Buzz! The divine body began to steadily break through and had already surpassed the 20,000-fold barrier. The consumption of treasures, however, was minimal. The treasures given to him by Wuxia were priceless. Although there weren't many treasures when the Three Kings' court collapsed, what remained was enough to drive the universe master mad. Especially the sky-sight heavenly chessboard. A temporal treasure. Back when Moro's spacetime didn't have many pieces. Among the treasures that ranked in the top 3 within the peak spacetime river, the temporal treasure was used by Qixin on the surface. Other universe masters didn't even have the courage to take it out, fearing it would attract the arrival of superpowerful beings. It indicated its importance. After the divine body broke through 20,000-fold, Jian Wushuang began absorbing the tears of the 100 weeping vines from the sky-sight heavenly chessboard. Next, he planned to directly surge towards a 30,000-fold divine body, reaching the pinnacle of Dao Lord. Ordinary Dao Lords were generally around 10,000-fold. A heaven-defying Dao Monarch would elevate the divine body to 30,000-fold. This could also be considered the peak of a heaven-defying Dao Monarch. But Jian Wushuang didn't limit himself to this. His goal was a 50,000-fold divine body, and with the heavenly demon art, he could forcefully elevate it to the major Mahayana realm, reaching the 50,000-fold divine body. Even his basic divine body could achieve the same. However, in the later stages, the accumulation of treasures was too vast, requiring a long period to digest. Ascending the divine body was simple in theory, but the time required for later stage advancements was astonishing. Bai Junwang had mentioned that when he broke through the 50,000-fold divine body, he obtained a treasure trove. It took several epochs of seclusion to thoroughly stabilize his divine body breakthrough. The assimilation of such massive treasures into the divine body incurred significant costs. It was akin to merging a towering tree into a grain of sand. Even more exaggerated than that. 1 grain of sand, 1 world. Infinite possibilities within. An instant became eternal. The physical body could reach eternity, and the divine body could achieve immortality. A 50,000-fold divine body could reach the stage of undying and indestructible. That's why those who followed the path of the divine body, upon reaching a 50,000-fold divine body, could rival Tier 6 emperors. Jian Wushuang, relying on his 50,000-fold divine body, could unleash such formidable strength initially because of the dual immortality of his physical and divine bodies. Unfortunately, maintaining a 50,000-fold divine body was extremely challenging. It required the accumulation of the basic divine body. Swish! Countless treasures gathered again as divine power condensed them into water, flowing into Jian Wushuang's body. Ripples began emanating from the divine body, a sign of its expansion. Jian Wushuang was about to break through the 30,000-fold barrier directly from a 20,000-fold divine body. The tears of the 100 weeping vines poured like waterfalls. Typically, those following the divine body path needed just a portion of the tears when breaking through 30,000-fold. Jian Wushuang, on the other hand, emptied all the tears from myriad realms. With the help of the genius treasures given by Wuxia, the divine body directly surged from 20,000-fold to 39,000-fold. Having exhausted all the treasures provided by Wuxia, and with the 100 weeping tears nearly depleted, it was time for an endless period of seclusion. Although he could directly break through to 39,000-fold, further growth required precipitation and time. As time passed minute by minute, over 1,000 years had already elapsed outside. Jian Wushuang closed himself off for tens of millions of years, a duration that held no sense of passing for him in his current state. His divine body was growing. His avatars, on the other hand, delved into the comprehension of the Sword Dao and the Extreme Dao. The avatar on the heavenly chessboard was constantly imitating the various origin source Daos that could be possessed. Soon, billions of years passed in the blink of an eye. During this time, Gong Miaoi went out a few times, visiting the Elder Palace to exchange for treasures needed for cultivation. Her gains in the Western Sea were substantial, possessing top-quality eternal treasures. She also exchanged for some special origin treasures from the Elder Palace. Her strength progressed rapidly, almost keeping pace with an inheritor. Although she was a peak-level Tier 5 emperor, she could contend with a Tier 6. On the other hand, Jian Wushuang's cultivation of the origin source was progressing slowly. After billions of years, he finally expanded the extreme Tao to the 8th level. However, reaching the 9th level or even achieving perfection in the 9th level required the spatial origin source to reach the level of a black hole. Currently, he only had 70% of the power of a black hole, still lacking quite a bit. Fortunately, the Sword Tao provided him with a clear direction. The embryonic form of the ultimate Sword Tao's 9th level was a formless sword. By comprehending the origin source within the Jueyun sword, he reached the 8th level. Jueyun suppresses evil. The formless sword was entirely oriented towards slaughter, annihilating everything. He was getting close to the 9th level. Merely relying on seclusion was no longer sufficient to meet his current needs. Moreover, his divine body had reached 49,000-fold, and when he wielded the beast god weapon, it easily reached 50,000-fold. His current combat power was not weaker than an ordinary Tier 6 emperor. It was time to go out and explore the various treasures of the Elder Palace. In a slow exhale, Jian Wushuang rose from his position, stretched his body, and leaped into a spring within the Grand Hall. The spring had the ability to quickly pull one's consciousness out of immersion. Jian Wushuang soaked for about the time it takes an incense stick to burn, then emerged. Changing into a soft black robe, he noticed Gong Miaoyi still in cultivation. Her subordinates had set up a barrier around her, so as not to disturb her. He silently left alone. Exiting the cave, an endless expanse of emerald green lakes stretched before him. The intense sunlight bathed everything in its glow. Boom! Jian Wushuang erupted from his spot and headed towards the southern islands. His first destination was the Demon Sound Mountain. He wanted to revisit this old place, uncertain if the demon sealing space was still intact. Back then, he had cultivated there for tens of thousands of years. Now, the mountain remained, but the familiar faces were gone. Along the way, Jian Wushuang encountered numerous emperors, mostly youthful faces, likely the later inheritors. As he expected, over the years, inheritors had sprouted like mushrooms throughout the Elder Palace. He had some understanding of the inheritors on Grave God Mountain. Although he hadn't been there, he had heard a lot. On Grave God Mountain, after becoming an emperor, there were also different ranks. Ordinary emperors, like Emperor Sitian, would generally leave the mountain to undertake missions in the 4 great secret realms. Extraordinary ones, like Hu Qing and the ultimate Light Tao Lord, were exempt from such requirements. They could freely cultivate on Grave God Mountain after becoming emperors. Most of those who had recently broken through to become emperors were second-rank origin source Tao experts. Many special origin sources or Tao lords of the ultimate Tao had yet to mature, still a long way from breaking through to emperor. After all, not everyone had accumulated to the peak before entering the Qixin Temple. For individuals like Zhou Yu and Wan Xing, who were already Tao Lord powerhouses before entering the Qixin Temple, with the temple's substantial cultivation, they quickly achieved Tao merge and became emperors. Swish! Outside the Demon Sound Mountain. Jian Wushuang was 1,000,000 miles away from the Demon Sound Mountain. From a distance, he could see the Demon Sound Mountain shrouded in clouds, emanating the former demonic sound and vast origin source aura. That origin source came from the Universe Master. Moreover, the Universe Master who left behind the origin source in this place was no ordinary being. Currently, there were many emperors cultivating on the Demon Sound Mountain, easily tens of thousands. Among them, in addition to the elders from the Elder's Palace, there were also inheritors and core members recruited from the heavenly realm by the Elder's Palace. The weakest among them were at the peak level Tier 4. Jian Wushuang took a step, directly arriving at the Demon Sound Mountain. At the foot of the mountain, there were special guardians from the Elder's Palace. It wasn't easy to enter the Demon Sound Mountain for cultivation. It required a significant contribution or godstones. Although the price was high, having money didn't guarantee entry from the outside. Inheritors generally paid with godstones, while the Elder's Palace's strong individuals exchanged contributions for a rare opportunity. To enter the Demon Sound Mountain, you need to pay 100 million godstones. The old guardian sat on the throne, expressionless, exuding unparalleled majesty. Several Tier 4 emperors in front of Jian Wushuang hesitated. Senior brother, we're still lacking 50 million godstones, spoke a peak-level Tier 4 emperor. This group of people, except for the leader, were all Tier 5 emperors. Even though they came from prestigious backgrounds, it wasn't easy for them to come up with 100 million godstones. In the standard of the Earth realm, the heavenly realm remained influential. A Tier 4 emperor in the heavenly realm often had a net worth ranging from several million to tens of millions of divine stones. Accumulating over 1 billion divine stones was a formidable task unless one had a tremendous stroke of luck or possessed treasures bestowed by sects or clans that could be used as collateral. The amount of godstones one could present wasn't as crucial as their intrinsic value. Some Tier 5 emperors found themselves penniless at times, but the treasures on their bodies and the profound martial arts they inherited held substantial value, easily exchanging for millions or even billions of divine stones. The leader of a group of Tier 5 emperors faced such a predicament. Hailing from the frigid northern regions, they were all distinguished individuals with powerful backgrounds. However, they were currently stumped by the requirement of 50 million godstones. Esteemed senior, may first offer this divine sword as collateral? The leading Tier 5 emperor felt a bit embarrassed. 50 million godstones weren't much to him, but due to financial constraints, he could only produce a valuable item as collateral. The elderly man seated on the throne furrowed his brow, showing little surprise. He couldn't help but hold some disdain for this Tier 5 emperor, thinking him rather destitute for offering a mere broken sword as collateral. In the background, Jian Wushuang raised an eyebrow and stepped forward, finding the broken sword increasingly familiar. Wait a moment, he approached, casually taking out 100 million godstones, and declared, I'll take this sword. Here's 100 million divine stones. The Tier 5 emperor recognized Jian Wushuang's extraordinary aura and promptly expressed gratitude. Many thanks, Your Highness. The elderly man on the throne was somewhat surprised. A broken sword was bought for 100 million godstones. While unusual, he didn't pay it much mind. Over the years, there had been many inheritors, and he had grown accustomed to their ways. According to the internal information of the Elder Palace, they knew these inheritors came from outer universes, inexperienced and naturally endowed with origin sources, surpassing the 4 great secret realms. Despite being stronger individually, they were rare in number. In the outer realms, there wasn't even a single Tier 6 emperor among them, a fact that often drew ridicule. In the past, the first batch of inheritors were mostly powerful, but the subsequent ones were mostly peak Tier 3 emperors with very few at the Tier 4. They weren't as highly regarded as before. Only a few inheritors, especially those at the Tier 5 emperor level, were truly valued. These powerful individuals, even at the 5th tier, could rival Tier 6 emperors, earning them respect regardless of their background. Jian Wushuang casually paid with godstones, received the broken sword, and didn't rush to leave. Instead, he inquired about the origin of the broken sword. He vaguely remembered the owner of this broken sword. When he entered the heavenly realm, this broken sword belonged to Nieyuan, if his memory served him right. Back then, he was puzzled. A Tier 4 emperor carrying a broken sword. Later, he learned at the Xianxia palace that Nieyuan was a sword fanatic who had sought his help due to matters involving his Dao companion. Unexpectedly, upon their reunion, only the sword remained. Jian Wushuang had always had a fondness for practitioners of the Dao of the sword. Seeing this cherished personal sword fall into someone else's hands and being pawned as a common treasure, Nieyuan's fate might not be favorable. Friend, may I inquire about the origin of this broken sword? Jian Wushuang asked nonchalantly. The Tier 5 emperor returned the extra 50 million godstones obtained from the auction and, realizing Jian Wushuang's status as an inheritor and sensing his formidable aura, dared not offend him. He honestly explained the sword's history. The broken sword was obtained by the Tier 5 emperor in the far north from a miner. The miner had attempted to bribe powerful figures from major clans with numerous treasures, and this broken sword was just one of them. Upon learning this, Jian Wushuang didn't delve into further questions and silently nodded. His thought power probed into the broken sword, detecting a familiar sword aura inside. It resembled the sword aura of the Xianxia Palace and, even more so, Nye Yuan's. Yet, what Jian Wushuang was truly familiar with wasn't Nye Lu and the Xianxia Palace's sword aura, but the smooth sword intent and the faint origin source. He was certain that this origin source was identical to the one within Gong Miaoyi. Even though it was the origin source of the ultimate sword Dao, it appeared as a thin piece of paper. Jian Wushuang had only seen this strange phenomenon within Gong Miaoyi's origin source. Besides Gong Miaoyi's own spatial origin source, there was also a thin sheet of paper origin source precipitating below, representing the origin source of the ultimate sword Dao. Jian Wushuang furrowed his brows slightly, thinking, Nye Yuan? Gong Miaoyi? Interesting. This could be the opportunity for his breakthrough in the sword Dao. If Nye Yuan was Gong Miaoyi's father, he could follow this lead, search for Nye Yuan, and emulate the sword Dao origin source within him. This might accelerate his progress, possibly allowing him to break through the 9th layer of the ultimate sword Dao and reach its peak. The far north. It seemed like he would have to embark on a journey. The Elder Palace was in the central province, also known as Zhongzhou. Meanwhile, the far north was at the northern boundary of the northern region, requiring him to traverse almost the entire northern region. Just for teleportation, he would need to teleport hundreds of times, and there was the possibility of encountering spatial turbulence midway, making temporal transport impossible, forcing him to rely solely on flying. A perilous journey. However, with Jian Wushuang's current strength, there wasn't much risk. But once bitten, twice shy. He still remembered being hunted down all the way to the lair of Guangmu Tianzuan in the northern region flowing state. In the end, he was captured by Junwang. Let's focus on cultivation first. Jian Wushuang shook his head, not dwelling on it too much. He could put off this matter for later. Who knew if Nye Yuan was still alive? He had to contact Chihuang and ask him to use his connections to inquire about the mines in the far north. According to some records, there were 3 major divine mines on the border of the northern region in the heavenly realm, and Nye Yuan's broken sword could appear in the hands of the mine guards. This indicated that Nye Yuan was probably thrown into the mines by the Elder's Palace. The environment there was exceptionally harsh, with Dao lords being no different from ants. Even emperors could only preserve their lives, ceaselessly mining day and night. Those who usually go there are those who have committed an offense and were taken away by the Elder Palace. After transmitting this information to Chihuang, he began to traverse the mountainous path of the Demon Sound Mountain. As usual, this path was filled with many powerful individuals. The narrow path proved challenging for 90% of emperors. For an average tier 4 emperor, reaching halfway up the mountain was already commendable. Among the disciples of Zhen Wuyang back then, those who could reach the mountainside were extraordinary individuals. For emperors from the 4 great secret realms, reaching the mountainside required the strength of a tier 5 emperor. As for reaching the mountaintop, it necessitated combat prowess comparable to a tier 6 emperor. Jian Wushuang took a step, sensing the demonic sound as he steadily moved forward. 100 feet, 1,000 feet, 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet. In the span of an hour, Jian Wushuang had reached the halfway point. Originally, some emperors didn't pay much attention, assuming it was just another heaven-defying inheritor from the Grave God Mountain. However, Jian Wushuang reaching the halfway point in just an hour startled them. Reaching halfway in just an hour, can't even tier 5 peak-level emperors achieve that? It was their first time witnessing it. Tier 6 emperors mostly wouldn't come to Demon Sound Mountain for cultivation, attracting at most some tier 5 peak-level emperors. Among the tier 5 emperors, the fastest to reach the mountaintop took 3 months. Took an entire day to reach halfway up the mountain, and now Jian Wushuang had set a small record. However, amidst the surprised gazes of these onlookers, Jian Wushuang didn't hurry to ascend. Instead, he crossed his legs and began to cultivate. The universe's origin source atop the mountain was more familiar to him than anyone else because he had once devoured a trace of it. It was a gift from Shanjun. Now, as he comprehended it, the process was remarkably smooth. It provided significant assistance to his extreme Dao. On the half-mountain slope, emperors seated in meditation were all of tier 4, numbering in the hundreds. Jian Wushuang found an inconspicuous spot, indifferent to the gazes of others, and began cultivating in solitude. The advancement of the extreme Tao was unlike the sword Tao. It required steady accumulation. Each Tao had to be meticulously comprehended, and the best way was to embody and emulate it. Inside the sky-sight heavenly chessboard within his body, his many avatars never ceased their contemplation, continuously understanding their respective origin source Taos. As his strength gradually increased, the origin chess pieces that were once unemulatable could now be embodied by him. Melody. Jian Wushuang carefully delved into the universe origin source again and discovered another origin source Tao. In the universe origin source on the mountain, there was a complete spatial origin source with an outer layer of temporal origin source. For now, he couldn't comprehend the temporal origin source. However, from the complete universe spatial origin source, he could gain insights into many origin source Taos. For instance, within this universe origin source, the most profound was the Tao of melody. Not bad at all, Jian Wushuang contemplated in his heart. The effect on the half-mountain slope was somewhat diminished. This time, he rose and took faster strides than when he ascended from the foot of the mountain, because he had developed some immunity to the effects of the demonic melodies. This was the benefit of comprehension, not being obstructed by the demon sound mountain. He stayed for less than a day before setting off again. This time, many emperors in meditation opened their eyes and watched. Look, he's on the move again. Humph, the middle of the mountain is simply not suitable for cultivation. With his abilities, a month's time is more than enough to reach the summit. Why waste time here? The speaker had a point, but it differed from Jian Wushuang's perspective. A day of cultivation here increased his speed by no less than 10 times. Originally, he could reach the summit in 3 days. Yet, after a day of cultivation here, he gained much mastery over the demonic melodies. Now, he could reach the mountaintop in just 1 day. Exhaling, Jian Wushuang moved like an ordinary person, steady strides on the mountain path. 1 step, 2 steps, 100 steps. In an instant, Jian Wushuang covered 1,000 feet. This scene drew gasps from the onlookers. How can he be so fast? Jian Wushuang's speed was astonishing, exceeding even the peak level Tier 5. Little did they know Jian Wushuang had an intimate understanding of this universe origin source. Had he not devoured a trace of it earlier, even with his current strength, it would take years to reach the summit despite his exceptional talent. His combat power had indeed reached the peak level Tier 5, thanks to the formidable divine body. The strength of the divine body might not have much correlation with cultivation. Comprehending the universal origin relied on both innate talent and the potency of the origin source. His current spatial origin source was only slightly stronger than that of ordinary Tier 5 emperors, as he had not fully mastered the realm of black holes. There was much room for improvement. Phew! Exhaling once again, Jian Wushuang didn't pause this time, heading straight for the summit. He hadn't had the opportunity to closely comprehend the origin source at the summit. Moreover, he wanted to enter the demon ceiling space and revisit the old place. As time ticked away, his speed had already alerted the elder guarding the melody-enshrouded mountain below. The elder, with flowing white brows and eyes congealed into slits, muttered to himself, "How have I not heard of such a talented individual?" Afterward, he began to inquire with some friends and learned about Jian Wushuang's identity from them. "Oh, it's him." The old man nodded. Once he knew Jian Wushuang's identity, everything made sense to him. Speaking of which, Jian Wushuang also had some credit for being able to send the Demon Sound Mountain to the Elder Palace. If it weren't for Shan Jun violating the rules, ultimately causing the Vermilion Bird Temple to take the blame, Zhenling would not have brought the Demon Sound Mountain to the 4 great secret realms. This was originally a treasure land in the original realm. Humph! Jian Wushuang took the final step and reached the mountaintop. If you didn't count the time he spent staying, this time it took him less than a day to reach the summit. The journey was smoother than he had imagined. At the moment of reaching the summit, he saw the appearance of the mountaintop. Compared to before, not much had changed, except that the pillar was gone, replaced by a palace. Demon Sound Divine General? Jian Wushuang saw the plaque above the palace and was somewhat surprised. The demon ceiling space was gone. How did it change to a palace, and it was named the Demon Sound Divine General? The cold wind and the thriving demonic sound on the mountaintop. There were only a few Tier 5 emperors here. Jian Wushuang scanned around and didn't recognize anyone. But from their auras, they should be Tier 5 emperors from the original universe. After arriving at the Qixin Temple, those emperors needed to find the grave god mountain themselves, and their strength was not enough. Most of them stayed in the Elder Palace and some went out for adventures. In just a few tens of thousands of years, none of them had achieved the kind of one-step-to-heaven existence, reaching the Tier 6 Emperor. Without the combat power of a Tier 6 Emperor, going to God's tomb to find the Grave God Mountain was courting death. Without the resources on Grave God Mountain, relying solely on places like the Elder Palace was just icing on the cake for them. They wandered in the river of time and space for years, and a Tier 5 Emperor was already a peak existence. In their timeline, there was no Universe Master, and even Tier 6 Emperors were rare. The Tier 5 Emperor was already a peak existence, having visited many precious places. Although Qixin Temple was unique, it lacked some ancient inheritances that wouldn't offer substantial help to them. Some places were particularly special, aiding their cultivation significantly faster than the outside world. The crucial one was the Grave God Mountain. Jinling had promised them that once they reached the Grave God Mountain, they could be cultivated into peak powerhouses. This assurance was quite bold. However, upon further thought, what Jinling did wasn't unreasonable. To reach the Grave God Mountain, they had to be at least Tier 6 Emperors. These emperors from the original universe were already individuals with tremendous luck and talent. Even without the cultivation from Qixin Temple, reaching the Tier 6 Emperor wasn't an issue. Once at the Grave God Mountain, Jinling would personally nurture them, and reaching the peak wouldn't be a problem. Reaching the peak meant real combat power, and as long as they weren't too foolish, they could attain the level of the former divine envoys. The battle power of Guangmu Tianzuan wasn't even on par with Bai Junwang. Though the divine envoy's combat power wasn't extraordinary, it was merely symbolic. The true power lay with the divine generals. Divine generals! Jian Wushuang looked towards the hall depicting the Demon Sound Divine General, thinking about something. Friend, have you come from the Grave God Mountain? Just as Jian Wushuang was lost in thought, a sturdy young man in dark red armor approached. Jian Wushuang knew that these people all came from the original universe, and he dared not be disrespectful. In the past, these were ancestors of some major forces. Now that they could stand shoulder to shoulder, he didn't dare to be too presumptuous. Elder, I am Jian Wushuang. Similar to the Elder, I have not yet been to the Grave God Mountain. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands, his voice showing a hint of respect. The listener paused, then thought of something and didn't ask any further. The name of Jian Wushuang was almost known to many in the Elder Palace because of that incident back then, which had shocked the entire Elder Palace. Those Tier 5 emperors from the original universe who came to the Elder Palace were naturally heard of, and they knew about Jian Wushuang, the unlucky guy who was taken away before even entering the Grave God Mountain. His life and death were unknown. So, your senior Zhutian. Jian Wushuang heard the other party's name and was truly startled. This was the owner of the Eternal Tower and the ancestor of the Peak Forces, the master of the Demon Lord Fengyu. If it were in the outside world, he would, at most, be a 9 revolutions Grand Yen Immortal now. It's not easy to meet such a big shot, let alone have an equal conversation. However, after encountering so many experts, Jian Wushuang remained calm. He had met many powerful experts. He had encountered many powerful Supreme Peak-level experts. There was the Grand Elder of the Mo Luo Nation, as well as Bai Junwang with whom he had a good relationship. Not to forget Shan Jun. He had encountered many in the Elder Palace as well, such as Wuxia, Emperor Lu Hua, and others. Now meeting a former top-notch expert, although there was some excitement in his heart, he quickly calmed down. Senior, have you just arrived at the Elder Palace? Zhu Tian smiled and said, I've been here for tens of thousands of years. I really envy you youngsters. You've caught up with a great era. Indeed, for the experts from the original universe, this was indeed a great era. In an era that propelled them to the pinnacle, these Tier 5 emperors were not inferior in talent compared to others. The paths they could take were extensive and challenging. Unlike Yen Immortals and Grand Yen Immortals who entered the Qixin Temple from a young age, enjoying the temple's protection throughout their journey, establishing a solid foundation. This era belonged to them. It was an era flourishing with the ultimate Tao, and with the cultivation from the Qixin Temple, a large number of ultimate emperors would emerge. Among these ultimate emperors, as long as 2 or 3 became universe masters, the Qixin Temple could venture into more powerful timelines, restoring the ancient glory. This was what Jinling wished to see. Although Jian Wushuang and his companions were unaware, they understood that the enormous resources invested in their cultivation would eventually need to be repaid. Apart from these practitioners of the ultimate Tao, a large number of emperors were emerging as well, forming the backbone of their strength. In the past, the Qixin Temple was filled with formidable individuals. It was not something that a few universe masters could suppress. Just the most powerful direct force under the Qixin's banner. The strengths of the 3 divine masters' deities alone could overthrow the 3 kings' courts. There were also 18 divine generals, each rumored to be supreme peak powerhouses among ultimate emperors. Besides these, there were some universe masters sent on external missions and extraordinary emperors. They dominated countless universes, traversing the entire timeline. Such power. Jian Wushuang's gaze sank, knowing that the other party had not yet gone to the Grave God Mountain and not wanting to say too much. He shifted the topic. Senior, when did this palace appear on the top of the Demon Sound Mountain? And what does the Demon Sound Divine General signify? When I arrived, this palace was already here. I heard it was built later. There is a remarkable presence here, responsible for suppressing the Demon Sound Mountain's formidable existence, said Emperor Zhu Tian, his eyes showing a longing expression. In the past, with lofty aspirations, he had been pursuing the position of the Universe Master. However, upon arriving at the Qixin Temple and witnessing numerous formidable figures, he realized how naive his ambitions were. Becoming the Universe Master was an arduous task. In this lifetime, reaching the pinnacle realm was considered commendable. Jian Wushuang was somewhat surprised. Initially, even Shan Jun was not powerful enough to sit in control here. How had a formidable figure appeared now? And he was known as the Demon Sound Divine General. This individual was likely one of the 18 divine generals of the Qixin Temple. Even Guangmu Tianzuan was still alive, so these divine generals might indeed still exist. However, he was unaware that in the Western Sea, Fuego emerged and gathered with Xinling. Meanwhile, Xinling personally intervened but couldn't find their traces. Although Fuego no longer possessed the power of the Universe Master, he was still not an opponent that an ordinary Supreme Peak expert could handle. Even with the realization of spatial cosmos by Shang, who was already a Supreme Peak expert, he was no match for Fuego. Within the Qixin Temple, apart from Xinling, it was likely that no one could stop Fuego. Xinling had to guard the Origin Source Sea, the most crucial location in the Qixin Temple. Xinling couldn't leave freely, especially now that Fuego had emerged. So, Xinling summoned the resurrected Demon Sound Divine General, one of the 18 divine generals, from God's tomb. The revived Demon Sound Divine General then took residence on the Demon Sound Mountain in the Elder Palace. "I'll wonder if we can go in?" Jian Wushuang asked cautiously. Emperor Zhu Tian had a longing look and said heavily, "You can go in, but the cost of entry is very high. So far, no one has been able to get in." The key was what benefits there were after entering, and this was Jian Wushuang's concern. Emperor Zhu Tian wanted to visit those powerful beings inside, seeking guidance for himself. For these Tier 5 emperors, the Tier 6 emperors they had encountered in their lives were not as numerous as those seen by Jian Wushuang in a single day. After arriving at the Elder Palace, they found that the Tier 6 emperors of the 4 great secret realms were not superior in terms of cultivation realm. There was not much difference from those of the same tier, and the Tier 6 emperors of the Elder Palace were scarce. Those emperors didn't even look at these Tier 5 emperors who hadn't even been to God's tomb. Most of the Tier 6 emperors of the Elder Palace would recruit some promising inheritors from God's tomb as their disciples. The Azure Dragon Temple, which was not in charge, had almost had all its inheritor emperors taken by the Elder Palace. The remaining few had to go to the White Tiger Temple. The weakness was going to the Vermilion Bird Temple in the original realm, where the treasures were abundant, but the tasks were intricate. It required venturing into other universes to plunder Yen Immortals and Grand Yen Immortals, which was also highly perilous. The Azure Dragon Palace was the poorest, offering little benefit and having nothing significant to do. It was visited the least, and those who went to the Azure Dragon Temple on the Bloodthirsty continent were mostly idlers. Among the 4 temples, only the Black Tortoise Temple did not accept inheritors. This was common knowledge among all inheritors. Those who wanted to actively join had no way forward. The presence of the Black Tortoise Temple was too low, and no one had even seen it. Jian Wushuang asked again, "Senior, is the cost to enter paid in Godstones?" Zhu Tian shook his head. If it were Godstones, they could easily plunder some from the heavenly realm, and entering would not be difficult. The key was that entering required strength. To enter, the first challenge is to comprehend the complete universe origin source of this universe. Only by obtaining the token can one enter the Demon Sound Hall. Zhu Tian took out a token. He had obtained it not long ago. Many Tier 5 emperors on the mountaintop had acquired it. It wasn't too difficult as long as one could reach the mountaintop and cultivate for a while. Jian Wushuang looked at the token, which contained the power of the universe origin source on top, and the characters Demon Sound were engraved on it. "Don't worry too much. This is just a token to knock on the door," Zhu Tian said, and at that moment, a humanoid beast-headed Tier 5 emperor in the distance stood up. Zhu Tian looked at the beast-like figure and smiled faintly. "Brother Dongsheng, are you confident?" Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang also looked at the Tier 5 god emperor named Dongsheng. It was the first time he had heard this name. It seemed to be a Tier 5 emperor from the original universe, but the name was unfamiliar. He should be a relatively ancient Tier 5 emperor. TSK, unlike you guys, always looking dejected. Such a good opportunity, and you don't seize it properly. As he spoke, his figure began to change, and the scales on his body became denser. As he approached the door of the Demon Sound Hall, he casually took out a token and tossed it towards the hall. A true door opener. Jian Wushuang scrutinized it carefully. Though Zhu Tian next to him seemed indifferent, his eyes still narrowed slightly. All of them had arrived at this place simultaneously, attempting countless times. Most of them had lost patience and descended the mountain. While the Demon Sound Mountain was indeed unique, it wasn't the only treasure land. This place wasn't suitable for unnecessary head-on clashes. It was more practical to change locations. Time was crucial for them. Now, the younger generation had caught up with them. Demon Lord Fengyu, Zhen Wuyang, Qi Shui, Tong Tian Buddha. They were all peak-level Tier 5 emperor, each possessing eternal treasures and formidable legacies, surpassing them in strength. Watching these juniors, who had surpassed them in a mere few 100,000 years, inevitably stirred some complex feelings in their hearts. For tens of thousands of years, surpassing the accumulation of countless epochs was an ordeal for them all. The crucial point was the tremendous impact from Shang. Initially, Shang was just an ultimate emperor slightly stronger than them. But now, he had ascended to the realm of a supreme peak-level powerhouse, a figure invincible even in the river of time. It hadn't been that long since Shang's breakthrough, considering him as their junior. This fact made their discomfort even more profound, emphasizing the gap between paths. Upon arriving at the Qishan Temple, they intensified their cultivation efforts, determined not to fall too far behind. However, they encountered a setback on the Demon Sound Mount. After Dongsheng presented the token, 6 silver-armored soldiers emerged from the Demon Sound Hall. Each wielded a long spear, dressed uniformly in silver helmets and capes. Their eyes glowed a dark red, concealing their features. In front of the Demon Sound Hall, a miniature world formed rapidly. The 6 silver-armored soldiers raised their spears, blocking Dongsheng's path. Zhu Tian, standing aside, spoke. "To enter, you must defeat these 6 silver-armored guards. No one has managed to overcome them so far. As Zhu Tian's gaze swept over, Jian Wushuang noticed the peculiar strength of these guards. They didn't seem like cultivators but rather a unique type of puppet. Their actual strength remained elusive. However, he would soon find out. Dongxing had transformed into his true form, the head of the Azure Dragon, with a human body and a divine body spanning billions of miles. A 50,000-fold divine body, Jian Wushuang exclaimed. He hadn't expected that these Tier 5 emperors would have such high value, actually cultivating their divine bodies to 50,000-fold. Zhu Tian, nonchalantly, remarked, "Hehe, don't be too surprised. We old folks aren't as simple as you might think. Dongxing once obtained an ancient inheritance in the River of Time, and in terms of treasures we're not fewer than you. Our divine bodies reached 50,000-fold long ago. If it were in the original universe, even if we scoured all the universe's secret realms, we probably couldn't gather this many treasures. Indeed, back when Wanderer Qishui revealed his strength, his divine body probably hadn't even reached 30,000-fold. Yet he claimed to be the strongest special life form in the original universe. This was the downside of not venturing out. The gap in treasures was too vast. When Zhu Tian left behind the Eternal Tower, he handed control of the entire East Universe to Demon Lord Fengyu. That eternal treasure was the only one in the entire original universe, left behind by Emperor Zhu Tian. Not even Shang had one. It was easy to imagine that Zhu Tian had gained a substantial amount of treasures back then, allowing him to generously leave behind such an eternal treasure. Commerce chose not to venture out to avoid wasting cultivation time. However, these Tier 5 emperors had ventured out countless times, and their accumulated treasures were quite substantial. For the first time, Jian Wushuang encountered a super powerhouse with a 50,000-fold divine body. He had obtained so many heaven-defying treasures that his divine body had just reached 49,000-fold. To break through, Jian Wushuang would have to devour the entire vine of the 100 Weeping Vine. Jian Wushuang felt a bit reluctant and didn't rush to break through. After all, the 100 Weeping Vines had reached maturity, constantly evolving in the River of Time within the Skysight heavenly chessboard, giving birth to countless tiers of weeping vines. Breaking through 50,000-fold was only a matter of time. If he really wanted to cut them down, he would have to buy them in the future. Jian Wushuang was afraid of being poor. In the auction, if he hadn't deceived people everywhere, he wouldn't have been able to buy anything. He wasn't like those people from the Elder Palace who could plunder treasures. Take a good look. The power of these guards is very special. Zhu Tian's eyes were somewhat excited as he said to Jian Wushuang. Boom! Jian Wushuang followed the direction of the intense aura. The 6 guards erupted with a world-destroying aura, each possessing the strength of a Tier 6 emperor. 6 Tier 6 emperors joining forces against a Tier 5 peak-level emperor. It's no wonder that none of them could enter. This was too outrageous. The combat power of these puppets was not comparable to those Tier 6 emperors who were pulling the lower ranks in the 4 great secret realms. The combined strength of the 6 already equaled that of a top-tier Tier 6 emperor. This was the normal standard of power. In other words, Emperor Dongxing would have to unleash the top-level Tier 6 to contend, and defeating them would be even more difficult. Without the combat power of a peak-level Tier 6, it was challenging to enter. To be at the peak level of Tier 5 and compete with the peak-level tier, perhaps only a few emperors on the Grave God Mountain could achieve that. He had originally thought of giving it a try, but now it seemed unlikely. Emperor Dongxing had indeed erupted with the top-level Tier 6, comparable to the 6 guards, but it would be difficult to defeat them. The prediction of Jian Wushuang was quite accurate. Since Dongxing dared to try, he probably had some confidence, but ultimately, it was just a glimmer of hope. Between cultivators of the same level, defeating the opponent either required depleting their power or overwhelming them with superior force. However, the puppet power of the Guardians was eternal and couldn't be exhausted. Only by using formidable strength could one crush through. No hope. Zhu Tian shook his head because Dongxing's aura was already declining. He couldn't hold on. It was too difficult. Zhu Tian was considering leaving the mountain. It was better not to stay here. It was time to try luck elsewhere. No, he's going to win. Jian Wushuang's gaze remained fixed. As Dongsheng's aura decreased, the sun and moon on Emperor Dongsheng's hands evolved into a black hole. The realm of a black hole. This time, not only would Emperor Dongsheng successfully enter the Demon Hall, but he might also break through to Tier 6. Zhu Tian's eyes constricted into a point. Shocked to the core. There was also envy. Among them, most were at the peak level of Tier 5, having accumulated countless epics. Breaking through was incredibly challenging, even in the 4 great secret realms. Yet now, Dongsheng became the first among them to break through. Annihilate! Dongsheng roared, and the sound of a dragon's roar echoed in the ears. The 6 guardians were all shattered and scattered on the ground. Bang! Dongsheng gasped for breath, put away the divine power in his hands, extremely excited, almost shouting out. Inside the Demon Sound Hall, a deep voice echoed, "Come in!" Dongsheng glanced back, and many Tier 5 emperors, who had been indifferent earlier, now looked at him with envy. "Humph! I'll be waiting inside for you." Although this statement was arrogant, no one paid it any mind. Dongsheng's success provided them with great motivation. It had only been 10,000 years. Dongsheng had entered, and they were not inferior. At most, there were some differences in time. Afterward, each one immersed themselves in cultivation. After Emperor Dongsheng entered the Demon Sound Hall, the silver fragments scattered on the ground turned into silver liquid, then transformed once again into silver armor guardians, standing in front of the door of the Demon Sound Hall. They once again guarded the entrance, preventing other from entering again. Emperor Zhudian's gaze was intense as he briefed Jian Wushuang on matters of comprehension. Afterwards, Jian Wushuang sought a secluded place to cultivate alone. The success in Dongsheng was indeed a tremendous encouragement for them. Either succeed or meet one's end. 10,000 years seemed too short for those peak-level Tier 5 emperors. Even an epoch was acceptable for them as long as there was hope. Currently, their hope lay in the origin source reaching the realm of the black hole. Jian Wushuang pondered for a moment, shook his head. These people had hope, but he truly had none. If reaching the realm of the black hole could be accomplished, he needed to focus on refining the extreme Dao directly and then embark on the pursuit of the Sword Dao. With both paths perfected, he could prepare for the Dao merge. Although they had no assurance of breaking through the black hole realm, he had the capability to reach 50,000 times the power of the divine body. Moreover, he had not yet obtained the token, and everything for them was still a long way off. Comprehending the origin source of the universe, gaining recognition from the origin source of the universe, would allow him to obtain a token from the Demon Sound Hall and randomly acquire some treasures. As for those treasures, he didn't really care much. According to Emperor Zhu Tian, they were given based on time. The faster one gained recognition, the more treasures they received. The most crucial item was the token itself, as it contained a trace of the universe origin source, allowing continuous comprehension. On this point, Jian Wushuang was not lacking. There were too many origin sources on the SkySight heavenly chessboard for him to comprehend. He could even devour them to strengthen his extreme Dao. Although the amount was small, it was still flesh. The origin sources on the SkySight heavenly chessboard were too powerful. He couldn't even devour some of them, and there were even some he couldn't comprehend. Obtaining a trace of the universe origin source to devour was nothing short of excellent. Emperor Zhu Tian, spending hundreds of years, could gain the acknowledgement of the universe's origin source. He estimated a shorter time frame. Ascending the mountain swiftly, he reached the summit and comprehended the universe's origin source. To gain recognition from the origin source was simply a matter of deepening his understanding on the existing foundation. Jian Wushuang found an open space, sat cross-legged. It was his first time contemplating at such a close distance, and the progress was rapid. Much more effective than sitting idle in his cave. The faint sound of demonic melodies surrounded Jian Wushuang. Immersed in it, he felt as if he had returned to the days of sword practice. In the past, sword practice was a matter of every breath and every millimeter. Now, utilizing the essence of the Sword Dao, he could unleash millions of swords with a single breath. Unconsciously, he executed his past sword techniques. A miniature figure floated on the sea of origin source, practicing the ancient sword art. The Tao is at its simplest. He indeed gained many insights. However, most of his focus remained on the universe's origin source. Gazing at the magnificent source, he couldn't help but drool at the thought of devouring it. If he could swallow this origin source, he might directly grasp the realm of black holes. Regrettably, he could not devour it. Back when Shanjun was present, even when confined, he could take down the origin source for Jian Wushuang to devour. Once he succeeded in integrating the Tao and possessed Shanjun's strength, he would definitely try. Thinking of Shanjun reminded him of the karma on his body. Too much. First, he had to seal the karma and resolve the cause and effect. In this calamity, he was bound to face it. His only choice was to break free of it. He wondered if Hu Qing had the ability now, but Hu Qing's path was not the orthodox Buddhist path but a path of Zen, offering little help. How about Tongtian Buddha? Jian Wushuang shook his head. Actually, there was no need to focus on those few individuals from the original universe. One could entirely seek solutions within the four great secret realms. To the west, in the extreme west of the heavenly realm, the Daxing Buddhist Tao. He could go there. On the journey, another goal emerged. Once, the thought of merging with the Tao seemed distant, but now it was getting closer. The breakthrough in the Sword Tao was related to Gong Miaoi and Nieyuan. The breakthrough in the extreme Tao was connected to the realm of black holes, both having clear directions. Only a breakthrough opportunity was missing. Once they all reached the point of completion or perfection, he had to merge with the Tao. Phew! A breath was expelled, shaking the trembling origin source. Hum! For others, this sound was familiar. It was the sound of recognition from the origin source. It had only been a few years, and Jian Wushuang himself hadn't expected it to happen so quickly. Emperor Zhu Tian in the distance slightly opened his eyes, showing shock and envy in them. However, he just nodded at Jian Wushuang without speaking, continuing to meditate with closed eyes. Jian Wushuang was overjoyed as he received the token that floated from the origin source and felt the aura above. It was more than he had imagined. The sliver of cosmic origin source that Shanjun gave them initially was not as much as what was on the token. After obtaining the token, there was no need to continue contemplating. Although contemplation aided cultivation, he didn't care much about that bit of assistance. Holding the token, he thought of directly devouring the origin source within it. However, upon second thought, if he truly devoured the origin source within, it would probably be impossible for him to enter the Demon Sound Hall in the future. After all, one needed this token to enter. Never mind. Let's leave this place for now. The help from the Demon Sound Mountain was limited, and although cultivation here was faster than in the cave abode, after years of seclusion, Jian Wushuang had little left to improve. What he needed now were some powerful opportunities. Just as Jian Wushuang was about to leave, another Tier 5 Emperor stood up and headed towards the Demon Sound Hall. Since time was not an issue, Jian Wushuang stopped in his tracks, ready to see if the other could pass through. The other Tier 5 Emperors also opened their eyes when they saw someone attempting the challenge. The success of Dongsheng was indeed stimulating to them. Wanyan, have you reached the Black Hole Realm too? Emperor Zhutian's eyes were deep, somewhat incredulous. They had known about Dongsheng's divine body being at 50,000-fold, but they were unsure about reaching the Black Hole Realm. Now it seemed that reaching at least the Black Hole Realm in spatial origin source was necessary to break through. Wanyan, the Tier 5 Emperor, didn't say much, only revealing a slight smile. Reaching the Black Hole Realm was not that easy. It wasn't necessary to reach the Black Hole Realm to pass through. Whoosh! As the token entered the Demon Sound Hall, the 6 Guardians, who were already waiting outside, opened their eyes, and the battle began the moment they did. Swish! Jian Wushuang's eyes focused, surprised at the scene. This Tier 5 Emperor named Wanyan, although unfamiliar to him, seemed to practice the origin source of Shadow Dao based on his methods. His figure was extremely elusive, instantly transforming into countless shadows, each shadow possessing the same strength as his main body. This was even more abnormal than his supreme physique, undoubtedly a unique and extraordinary great Tao. The kill formation of myriad shadows, someone exclaimed. Then everyone looked over. Jian Wushuang was not quite clear about the opponent's ultimate technique, so he listened carefully to the discussions among the other emperors. L didn't expect him to reach the level of myriad shadows. In our space, there are probably no more than 3 experts who have reached the level of myriad shadows, and all of them are Tier 6 emperors. How did Wang Yan reach such a level? Isn't he just a Tier 5 emperor? It's not surprising. After all, he is a master of the Shadow Dao. In his spatial domain, the origin source of the Shadow Dao thrives, making him faster than others, which is normal. From the words of these people, Jian Wushuang learned about the myriad domain shadow slaughter formation, the supreme technique of a supersect in the river of time and space. After the sect's destruction, its legacy remained in the river of time and space. Discovered countless epochs ago, it was considered a super inheritance. Though not as grand as the Qixin Temple, it contained a technique that was truly extraordinary. It was the domain. Domains were divided into 2 types: shadow and escape. The man named Wang Yan cultivated the inheritance of the shadow lineage. Reaching the level of myriad shadows was already a great accomplishment realm. No wonder he dared to challenge the Demon Sound Hall. Countless shadowy figures besieged a silver-armored guard, quickly shattering it. Following the same method, they broke through one after another. If it were at the level of 1,000 shadows, it probably wouldn't have broken through one, and he himself wouldn't have held up. But reaching the level of myriad shadows was a qualitative change. His success also enlightened others. Instead of trying to break through the realms, it was better to cultivate their own supreme techniques or secret arts to perfection or the great accomplishment realm. That way, they could also overcome the challenges. Splash! This time, a bubble emerged from the Demon Sound Hall, enveloping Wang Yan as he entered it. Many people watched with envy. Just as they were discussing, Jian Wushuang also approached the entrance of the Demon Sound Hall. He's also going to challenge it? Jian Wushuang? A poor little guy who got the token early, but it doesn't represent his strength. Many people just took a glance and then closed their eyes to continue cultivation. None of them believed that Jian Wushuang could make it through. Not to mention them, even Jian Wushuang himself had no confidence. However, since he had come, he couldn't just stand by. Indeed, shortly after his arrival, he witnessed 2 people successfully breaking through. He felt an itch in his hands as he watched. Casually tossing the token, Jian Wushuang waited quietly for the guards to revive. Buzz! His aura began to rise, and his divine body, originally at 49,000-fold, soared directly to 50,000-fold. With the current Beast God weapon, the maximum amplification was up to 50,000-fold, even though his basic divine body was already 49,000-fold. The current limit of the Beast God weapon was 50,000-fold, and in order to further increase it, he needed to restore its previous power. As for the divine techniques of the divine body, they were even rarer. Some of the divine techniques circulating in the 4 great secret realms could reach a maximum of 50,000-fold. Those exceeding 50,000-fold were rare supreme techniques that he couldn't buy. If only Bai Junwang were still alive. Bai Junwang's divine body alone had 68,000-fold, and his divine techniques were probably between 70,000-fold to 80,000-fold, enough for him to cultivate to the supreme peak evil. Unfortunately, Bai Junwang had fallen. Facing Tier 6 emperors, and 6 of them at that, Jian Wushuang's greatest reliance was his divine body. A 50,000-fold divine body allowed him to contend with Tier 6 emperors, but only at the level of contention. Jian Wushuang hesitated. He noticed that these puppets were still not reviving, and it had been about 3 breaths. Could it be that just now Wang Yan damaged them? It didn't seem likely. These puppets looked new, and before their revival, although he couldn't sense their aura, they showed no change from their appearance compared to the past. On the silver armor, there was still an ancient inscription Xian. It should be forged by Xuanwu, Black Tortoise Temple. The quality should not be bad. Swish! The 6 silver shadows disappeared instantly, precisely the silver-armored guards standing in front of the door. Jian Wushuang almost took action but found that these guards returned to the Demon Sound Hall. This scene puzzled him. What was going on? Did the silver-armored guards just leave like that? Was it because they didn't let him proceed? Or was it because his strength was too low, and they thought it was a waste of time? Jian Wushuang's current combat power was indeed average. He could match an ordinary Tier 6 Emperor in the 4 Great Secret Realms, but in terms of true strength, any of these old guys on the mountaintop could easily defeat him. However, he possessed a divine body with a power 50,000-fold that of an ordinary being. Regardless, they shouldn't underestimate him like this. For a moment, Jian Wushuang felt awkward, standing in place, unsure whether to leave or stay. The token was still inside. He couldn't just leave like this. At least return the token to him. Inside, there was even a strand of the universe's origin source. Just as Jian Wushuang hesitated, the 6 silver figures appeared again, fully restored. Phew! Jian Wushuang breathed a sigh of relief. Now that they were restored, he didn't feel too worried. He raised his hand, and the sky was filled with sword chi. His divine body also swelled, increasing over 10,000 feet. Crack! Just as he started, before the sword chi could even fill the air, those silver-armored puppets had already shattered. Looking at the scattered fragments, Jian Wushuang was stunned. SRMS, weren't these puppets Tier 6 in strength? How did they become so weak that they couldn't withstand a single blow? He didn't even sense a strong aura, and yet these puppets shattered. Not waiting for him to think too much, a bubble enveloped him, directly entering the interior of the Demon Sound Hall. On the mountaintop, originally paying no attention, everyone opened their eyes one after another. When they saw the Demon Sound Hall, there were only fragments outside the door, and there was no trace of Jian Wushuang. How is this possible? Everyone gasped in shock, getting up one after another. Emperor Zhutian walked to the forefront. Looking at the fragments all over the ground, he couldn't believe that Jian Wushuang had actually broken through. The impression Jian Wushuang gave him was clearly only at the peak level Tier 5. In terms of cultivation realm, he was not stronger than them at all. His divine body was only somewhat special, reaching 50,000-fold, and they just thought Jian Wushuang entered the Qixin Temple early and got more treasures. But in terms of cultivation realm, it was a fact. Their cultivation realm was almost reaching the power of the black hole realm at 90%. Jian Wushuang was only around 80%, a significant difference. As for profound and supreme techniques, he hadn't seen anything, and yet Jian Wushuang was gone. Strange. Not only were these people shocked, but Jian Wushuang was also surprised. He passed through with just a lift of his hand. This was too easy. Whoosh! Back to Jian Wushuang. The void tore, and he entered the Demon Sound Hall. He was very familiar with this space. Wasn't this the demon ceiling space? Dark, pitch black, desolate. Entering slowly, Jian Wushuang's mind was stirred. The place was the same, but there had been significant changes in the aura, giving him a cold and indifferent feeling. In the dark space, only one place had light. In the light and shadow, a figure sat cross-legged. The face couldn't be seen clearly, but Jian Wushuang saw the universe from that figure-a unique temperament of the universe realm. This person was formidable enough to reach the universe realm, and Jian Wushuang couldn't see through him. This person should be the Demon Sound Divine General. For a Tao Lord like you to easily gain the recognition of the origin source of the universe is impressive. A long and narrow voice accompanied the Demon Sound transmission. Jian Wushuang listened carefully and quickly bowed. This guy was indeed a big shot. In the beginning, there was the Divine General, higher than the Divine Envoys or Divine Messengers. The next level up was the Divine Master. The strength of an envoy reached the supreme peak level, and the power of this Demon Sound Divine General probably surpassed even the likes of Wuxia and Bai Junwang among the supreme peak. Only the 4 great temple masters could be comparable to such figures. In the 4 great secret realms, these individuals were invincible. Jian Wushuang had to be cautious. You're quite impressive. I heard about you from Wuxia. You can call me Ma Yin. The Demon Sound Divine General, Ma Yin, said indifferently. Jian Wushuang was somewhat flattered. He hadn't expected to be so famous, not only known by the Tier 5 Emperor of the original universe but also recognized by the Demon Sound Divine General. Divine General Mayin raised his hand, and a beam of light descended. The dark red ground beneath began to collapse, eventually transforming into a bubbling lava purgatory. Entering here is just the first step. This purgatory has 3 bridges. Everything depends on your luck, he declared. Jian Wushuang looked at the purgatory beneath his feet, his mind shaken. He replied, yes. Although he felt immense danger, it came with tremendous opportunities. His figure began to descend. From above, it appeared as a purgatory, but when he reached the bottom, the scene changed. After he entered the purgatory, the ground reverted to its dark red color, as if no changes had occurred. The Demon Sound Divine General slowly opened his eyes, seeing through space with a glance and looking at Jian Wushuang. In his heart, he mused, this guy the favored one of the era? Is he truly that powerful? Having just revived, his strength had returned to its peak. A character who had already fallen, upon revival, although his strength was restored, he no longer had the hope of becoming the universe master in this lifetime. How unwilling! If that were the case, it would have been better to remain fallen. Now he, who was still alive, was merely a spirit, a trace of soul selected from the past timeline by the Zhenling, placing the flesh back and integrating the soul. Would he truly be himself? Contemplating this, Divine General Mayin slowly closed his eyes. After entering the purgatory, Jian Wushuang found himself on a winding path. It was unremarkable, devoid of any peculiarities or obstacles. Walking along it seemed to offer no advantages, surrounded by darkness with the risk of getting lost if he deviated. Interesting. This seems to be a special space, not a blessed land. There was a significant difference between a special space and a blessed land. Continuing down the path, Jian Wushuang finally reached the first bridge. Below the bridge, there flowed scorching magma, while on the bridge, there were wandering souls. These souls swayed aimlessly, resembling the sprites after the Emperor's fall, but with much greater strength. Each one was at the Emperor level, unconscious in their wanderings, numbering in the hundreds. Although the strength of these wandering souls was considerable, all of them were Tier 3 Emperors. Who were they underestimating? Jian Wushuang took a step, and behind him, thousands of sword chi erupted, dispersing the souls on the bridge. Crash! In the instant the souls dissipated, the entire bridge began to crumble. Jian Wushuang couldn't just stand by and watch. He had to retreat. However, the bridge disappeared. What is this? Jian Wushuang was puzzled. Could it be related to the wandering souls? He speculated. If that were the case, at least give him a chance, like returning to the starting point. What if there was no way forward halfway through? Flying over wasn't an option, right? The powerful force of the pull, he estimated, hadn't even flown over yet, and he feared he might have dropped into the molten lava below. The magma couldn't harm him, but the wild beasts within, all genuine Tier 6 Emperors, meant only a dead end awaited him if he fell. What to do? Jian Wushuang scratched his head. Glancing at the magma below, he took a step back. Swimming across was out of the question. Even if he transformed into a wild beast, he would still be recognized, unable to blend in. Searching around, he found nothing but a body covered in weeds. What kind of hell is this refining? He sighed helplessly and had no choice but to head backward. Returning along the original path meant a journey of 100 years. Despite only taking an hour to arrive, going back took a century, and crucially, he hadn't reached his starting point. Midway, he regretted his decision, retraced his steps toward the bridge, but couldn't reach it, forced to follow a single path. 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. Jian Wushuang, initially hopeful, gradually gave up, even shouting the name of Divine General Mayin in hopes of getting out. But in this cursed place, shouting to the heavens brought no response. Slowly, exhaustion set in. Walking, he lost his humanoid form, his body unkempt, resembling the souls he saw on the bridge. Unconsciously, he continued walking, the awareness in his mind gradually fading away. He didn't know how long he had been walking. The power of his divine body had been completely depleted without replenishment, but thankfully, his physical form was indestructible. At least he still retained a semblance of humanity. After an unknown amount of time had passed, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him. The figure was elusive and transparent, with a skeleton trailing behind it, presumably left behind by a physical body. Without a physical body or divine form, all that remained of a person was the soul. As for the origin source, it had long been lost. The moment Jian Wushuang saw the figure, it was as if he had glimpsed hope. A spring burst forth in the mustard seed, instantly replenishing the divine body. Subsequently, his eyes began to brighten, and his footsteps quickened. From limping to walking normally, he even started running. This time, instead of taking action, he rushed to the front of the figure, intending to awaken them. Now he understood. The wandering souls on the bridge were probably practitioners who came to this place. The bridge would disappear by extinguishing those wandering souls. Although he still didn't quite understand why, it was clearly related to practitioners. Having finally seen another practitioner, how could Jian Wushuang not be excited? After discerning the visage of the other's soul, Jian Wushuang was somewhat surprised. Wasn't this Wan Yen, who had entered the demon sound hall ahead of him? The other was even more pitiful than him, consciousness weakened to the point of no perception. No matter how Jian Wushuang tried to call him, there was no response. Jian Wushuang raised his hand for 2 resounding slaps, but unfortunately, the other was in a soul state and couldn't be touched at all. In the end, he could only endure the pain and take out numerous godstones, forcefully stuffing them into the other's being. A trace of power gathered, and Wanyan's eyes began to show glimmers. His consciousness gradually returned. At the moment of the other's awakening, upon seeing the Jian Wushuang in front of him clearly, he instantly became astute. Jian Wushuang. Wan Yen recognized Jian Wushuang. Back when Jian Wushuang gained recognition from the origin source, he had seen him. Subsequently recalling the various events leading to their current situation, he utilized the power of godstones to restore his divine body and condense his physical form. With it, Wan Yen's origin source also restored to its peak. After the recovery, Wan Yen quickly took out a clean set of robes from a mustard seed and put them on. "Thanks a lot for this." Jian Wushuang waved his hand, saying, "Now is not the time to discuss this. Fellow Taoist, isn't it because of that bridge that you ended up like this? If that were the case, then the souls on that bridge weren't meant to be annihilated by them, but to be rescued. Great sins. Those figures, they should be individuals from ancient times, practitioners who lost their way in this place." Wan Yen was momentarily stunned, then nodded. Just as Jian Wushuang had speculated, it was indeed like this. With others accompanying them, walking on this dim path, it finally didn't feel as desolate. Moreover, since he had saved Wan Yen, his spiritual consciousness had undergone a tremendous improvement. His soul realm was already powerful, making it not easy for his consciousness to be destroyed. So that's how it is. Jian Wushuang realized and couldn't help but think he had underestimated some of the ancient inheritances. Such a subtle calculation was simply unprecedented. He had never heard of such a thing before. This was still the first bridge. Jian Wushuang, accompanied by Wan Yen, continued on the journey. The dim path started to widen, and the two of them walked easily without any sense of fatigue. Sure enough, less than an hour later, a bridge appeared in front of them. Similar to the first bridge they had encountered, there were hundreds of souls above. "Absolutely do not do anything," Jian Wushuang warned. He had already shared his speculation with Wan Yen. They couldn't harm the souls upon reaching the bridge. First, they would use the power of the godstones to see if they could revive these souls. Jian Wushuang carefully walked onto the bridge, and a soul stood before him. Whoosh! Millions of godstones turned into a torrent approaching the soul. He wanted to test if his speculation was correct. As the torrent approached the souls, they didn't absorb the power but instead retreated a few steps. Jian Wushuang was startled but relieved to find that the bridge did not collapse. In this way he, along with Wan Yen, using the power of the godstones, dispersed the souls blocking their path. There was still some deviation. He dared not be careless at all. His steps were slow and steady, even though a hint of cold sweat appeared on his forehead as he looked down at the savage beasts under the bridge. However, he maintained his composure. Are we really going to cross like this? Wang Yan couldn't believe it. After crossing the first bridge, both of them breathed a sigh of relief, feeling a sense of ease. In the moment they crossed, the bridge collapsed again. But this time it was already behind them, and the collapse didn't matter. Before they could fully rejoice, their figures uncontrollably flew out, the space shifted, and when they appeared again, they were back at the starting point. Jian Wushuang was a bit frustrated. What was going on? Were they being treated like fools? Unable to save, unable to kill, and unable to proceed. Wang Yan was also somewhat overwhelmed. The trauma they suffered when they lost consciousness earlier was too great. It's over. We're trapped in a death loop. Wang Yan's face looked haggard. Since losing consciousness earlier, their bodies had inexplicably felt tired. But there was no suppression here. Jian Wushuang's gaze was complicated as he said, "Try moving forward again. We can't linger too long, or we might lose consciousness again. By that time, I might not be able to hold on." He had walked the soul steps in the Western Sea, and his soul and mental strength were relatively powerful, allowing him to endure. Wang Yan, as a Tier 5 emperor of the original universe, although he had some significant opportunities, he wasn't as well-rounded as Jian Wushuang. After hearing Jian Wushuang's words, Wang Yan was startled, experiencing a sensation of losing consciousness that was terrifying, akin to the destruction of the soul, leaving only a disembodied spirit. He didn't want to get lost in this place. Oh right. The first one to enter this place should be Emperor Dongsheng. Why isn't he here? Jian Wushuang thought of the emperor who was the first to enter the Demon Sound Hall. He almost forgot about him. If he could encounter Wang Yan, he should also encounter Dongsheng. Did he pass through already? Jian Wushuang found it hard to believe. After all, the emperor wasn't particularly special, just a spatial realm higher than him. If they didn't break through, and neither of them saw it, their fate would be uncertain by now. Wang Yan shook his head, thinking about the lava under the bridge and those savage beasts. Considering Dongsheng's personality, he might actually swim across. If he couldn't make it, he'd end up buried in the mouths of the savage beasts. If he swam across and got transported back, it would probably be even more frustrating. Regardless, since this method doesn't work, let's try another one. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, a determined force surging. Cultivators tread the path against the heavens. He refused to believe otherwise. Since this was an inheritance ground, there must be a way to break through. He had managed to defeat the 3 kings before. Dealing with the perilous traps set by Divine General Mayin shouldn't be beyond him. The two of them advanced forward again, this time at an even faster pace. Within less than an hour, they arrived at the bridge. Seeing the bridge, both of them breathed a sigh of relief. They weren't afraid to try. They were afraid of not having the opportunity to try. It would be troublesome if they couldn't find the bridge. The oppressive feeling of walking an endless path was too much. Arriving at the bridge, this time Jian Wushuang took out the Godstones. In addition to the Godstones, he also drew upon the power of his origin source. Under the combination of origin and divine power, the wandering souls retreated instead of being absorbed. Jian Wushuang decided not to cross the bridge this time and continued to try various methods. Beside him, Wang Yan also used all his tricks, almost kneeling down and kowtowing to these wandering souls, even burning incense. What's wrong? Jian Wushuang gradually stood on the riverbank, deep in thought. The wandering souls are on the bridge. What exactly do they want them to do? Soul crossing. Jian Wushuang's eye sockets suddenly contracted as he thought of a mundane legend. However, this story was relatively common among the people. Back when he was just a commoner, not even a ruler. This legend was definitely unrelated to this place, but it could serve as a reference. The story goes that a scholar heading to the capital for the imperial examination got trapped on a desolate burial mound and wandered for days without finding a way out. After running out of provisions, He became dizzy with hunger and started seeing unclean things, such as wandering souls and wild ghosts. These wandering souls and wild ghosts all bowed to him, claiming he was the judge of the underworld sent to save them. They begged the scholar to ferry them across, and in a daze, the scholar actually guided these wandering souls to the underworld's river Styx. Freed from the entanglement of wandering souls and wild ghosts, the scholar finally left the burial mound and arrived in the capital on the last day of the imperial examination. Originally, his knowledge was sufficient for him to be at least a top scholar, but when the results were announced, he unexpectedly became the top scholar. He later served as an official in a state, becoming a well-known senior historian in that dynasty. He gathered a group of experts to escort him, and before taking office, he wrote down his experiences. Although there was a possibility of fabrication, his actions in the mortal realm were no different from the judge of the underworld, first ferrying lost souls, then judging the living. Jian Wushuang contemplated this legend. The similarities between the two stories were intriguing, and the solution to the puzzle seemed to lie within. Ferrying souls, that wasn't his expertise. However, if he wanted to ferry these wandering souls without using the bridge, there was only one method left. That was to pass through the magma under the bridge. It was too risky. Jian Wushuang turned to look at Wang Yan. He wanted to coax the other party to give it a try, but Wang Yan was no fool and would definitely not agree. Fortune favors the bold. Let's gamble. Jian Wushuang gritted his teeth, turned to look at the grass on both sides of the narrow path. Now he understood the role of these weeds. It was for him to make a boat out of them. As for using a flying treasure, even thinking about it with his knees, it was impossible. This is the situation. Whether you believe it or not, friend, I'm going first. Jian Wushuang explained the cause and effect he had speculated on. Without insisting on anything, he went alone to cut the grass and make a boat. As for Wang Yan, he really didn't believe it. When Jian Wushuang proposed this method, he looked at Jian Wushuang with a look of seeing a fool, feeling that the other party was crazy, and directly denied it. However, Jian Wushuang didn't care. He cut all the grass and quickly built a long grass boat. Lifting the grass boat, Jian Wushuang became more and more convinced of his speculation. In the mundane world, things burned for the dead were made of paper. In ancient times, it might not necessarily have been grass. Arriving at the riverbank, Jian Wushuang manipulated his telekinesis, making the grass boat float, and then walked up. Looking at those wandering souls, Jian Wushuang spoke in ancient language, "Come aboard." As soon he said this, these wandering souls really walked over, one after another boarding the grass boat. The grass boat was small, but it also contained the origin of space with a spatial compression effect. Hundreds of wandering souls boarded the boat without crowding. Wang Yan was stunned by this scene. He still had some doubts and wanted to wait and see when Jian Wushuang went down. On Jian Wushuang's side, after collecting all the wandering souls, with a mental command, the grass boat began to descend, ultimately landing steadily on the surface of the magma. As Wang Yan looked down from the shore, a colossal beast, the size of 10,000 horses, opened its blood-stained maw and directly swallowed the grass boat, splashing countless magma into the air, then returning to calm. Wang Yan took a sharp breath, covered his chest, and thought to himself, "Thank goodness I didn't follow down there." Now on the bridge, with no lost souls around, he didn't know what to do. Eventually, he stepped onto the bridge once again. This time he walked fast, almost running, directly crossing the bridge without stopping, continuing forward. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, Wang Yan found no changes around him. Turning his head to look back, the bridge was still there. He had crossed it. "Ha! I made it." Wang Yan laughed heartily, feeling very good. The fatigue on his body was also swept away. As for Jian Wushuang, he didn't have much thought for others. He continued forward alone. The farther he went, the wider the road became. After an entire day, he didn't encounter a second bridge but arrived at a massive Dao arena. Inside the Dao arena, there were altars, statues, and many meditation cushions. Wang Yan carefully observed everything and entered the Dao arena. Passing through a thin barrier, The power on his body started to tremble. Turns out, before entering this place, he had no divine power on him. No wonder he felt exhausted. After entering the Tao arena and glancing around, rows of cushions stood, soft to the touch, nothing special. But when he walked to the front, he discovered someone sitting cross-legged on the most robust cushion. Jian Wushuang, Wan Yen exclaimed. Hearing someone call his name, Jian Wushuang also startled, turning to look back. Dao friend Wan Yen. Jian Wushuang was equally surprised. Clearly, he arrived here only after successfully crossing the Soul Bridge. How did Wan Yen also come here? Could it be that after he left, more wandering souls appeared on the bridge, and Wan Yen followed his method to reach this place? Just as he was about to inquire, the next words from Wan Yen left him dumbfounded. You were devoured by a savage beast, weren't you? How are you still alive? Jian Wushuang touched his chin, confirming his existence, and replied, You personally witnessed me being swallowed by a savage beast? But after he entered the magma, those savage beasts disappeared, smoothly traversing, leading the wandering soul to the other side. He was then transported to this martial practice ground. Simultaneously, his soul realm advanced rapidly, and within the practice ground, he obtained numerous treasures from the altar. The treasures he acquired this time were no longer comparable to spatial godstones but rather universe source stones. Tens of thousands of universe source stones, each containing the essence of the cosmic origin source. Judging by the other party's appearance, it seemed he had just arrived here. Wan Yen recounted his own experiences, leaving Jian Wushuang astonished. Was it that simple? Just walked straight in. Then wasn't he at a huge disadvantage, risking his fall just to come here? However, Jian Wushuang soon understood. After Wan Yen arrived, he gained no treasures at all, equivalent to making a fruitless trip on the first bridge. Without being asked, he wouldn't disclose how many treasures he had gained. Even if asked, he wouldn't tell. Now, Wan Yen was proudly narrating how smooth his journey had been. Jian Wushuang shook his head, changed the topic, and asked, Friend Wan Yen, what's the deal with the Tao marks within this space? He had never immersed himself in the Tao, so he knew very little about a complete space. Only aware that, once the space stabilized, countless stars would be born, marking the advent of the star realm. Subsequently, black holes emerged, representing the black hole realm, and ascending further led to the cosmic or universe realm. Understanding only the general concept, the details remained elusive. Yen was in a good mood, patiently explaining to Jian Wushuang, It's normal not to know that you're about to break through to the emperor level. Tao marks represent your origin source Tao. For instance, say your origin source is of the metal element and you cultivate it to the completion or perfection of the 9th level. You then successfully complete Tao merge, mastering the spatial origin source. Then what about your metal origin source? Although the metal origin source corresponds to space, it won't completely evolve into space. It leaves Tao marks within the spatial origin source. The more Tao marks, the stronger your metal origin source. Take me, for example. I cultivate the shadow Tao. In my spatial origin source, the most abundant Tao marks are of the Tao of shadows, followed by the escape Tao. After mastering the spatial origin source, normally you can comprehend any Tao. We are aware of the myriad Tao that can be practiced before merging with the Tao. You should know that its uniqueness lies in being able to cultivate all origin source Taos before merging. The more you practice, the stronger you become after merging. Ordinary origin sources cannot be cultivated this way, or it will backfire. Jian Wushuang finally understood. His extreme Tao belonged to the exceptional myriad Taos. No wonder, after devouring so many origin sources, there were so many fragments in his spatial origin source like Tao marks. However, without integrating the Tao, these fragments were more of a burden, requiring him to refine them further and transform them into Tao marks. So that's how it is. Thanks, fellow Taoist. Jian Wushuang clasped his hands in gratitude. While cultivating here and observing the solemn Buddha-like statue, he saw that the spatial origin source of the other party contained an immense number of Tao marks. The entire space was filled with countless stars and several black holes. He watched with envy. The true body of this Tao form should be a supreme peak expert, at least at the level of Wuxia. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a black hole in the spatial origin source. The space had already reached the level of the universe. After sitting cross-legged on the cushion beside him, Wang Yan glanced at the Tao form and understood why Jian Wushuang had asked him. So many Tao marks. Among them, there were dark Tao marks, with tens of thousands of them, indicating that this emperor had succeeded in merging with the origin source Tao of darkness. The origin source of space had also reached the level of the universe. Wang Yan looked at it with longing. This was the peak level he was pursuing. When would he be able to reach this level of strength and fear nothing in the river of time? In his current space, he mainly cultivated the Tao marks of the shadow Tao, but there were barely 100, pitifully few. There was no condensation of a black hole, only a few stars connected in a line. Compared to Wang Yan, Jian Wushuang had more Tao marks on his body. But these Tao marks were not visible. When he became an emperor one day, the Tao marks would erupt, and he might even reach the Tier 6 emperor. The two stayed here for a long time, comprehending everything they could from the Tao form, gaining significant improvement. Inside Jian Wushuang's origin source sea, some suspended debris turned into seawater again. Only a small part remained. Perhaps I don't need to reach the level of a black hole. My extreme Tao origin source can reach its peak, Jian Wushuang speculated to himself. The realm of the black hole was too difficult. Originally, he thought he was getting close, but he discovered that those peak-level Tier 5 emperors were much stronger than him. The black hole, condensed by 99%, couldn't be broken through. He could only control 80% of the power of the black hole now, which was far from enough. If he waited for a breakthrough in the realm of the black hole, it might take who knows how long. Even with time acceleration, he had been practicing for almost an epoch, and he still looked like this. The later it got, the harder it became. Combined with his slow comprehension without the Tao merge, breaking through the realm of the black hole before reaching the foundation of 10 epochs would be challenging. Time left for him was limited. The longer he delayed, the greater the gap with the other inheritors of the same batch. He couldn't afford to procrastinate. This time, when he came out of seclusion, he heard that Citian had reached Tier 5. This couldn't go on. If he delayed any longer, it wouldn't be him seizing the beast god weapon from Citian, but Citian coming to trouble him. After all, it hadn't been long since Citian had grown to this level. Who knew if, in a few epochs, the other party would explode, reaching the Tier 6 directly, or even the supreme peak. Citian's talent was indeed average, but his luck was good. Being able to obtain the components of the beast god weapon in the original universe was definitely a person with great luck. This guy, relying on luck, could reach this level. Jian Wushuang hadn't expected it. Back on the original star of Alpha 9, Citian was the least promising. The ones with real potential were Hu Qing and Ji Chaoyang. Apart from the ultimate Tao, another noteworthy figure was Wan Xing. Wan Xing's potential was good. When they met in the Western Sea, he was already a peak-level Tier 4. With the gains from the Western Sea over the years, reaching the Tier 5 wasn't difficult. But Citian didn't have any significant opportunities. Just that in Elder Palace, he found a backer and could break through so quickly. This time, he must find a way to deal with Citian. The beast god weapon was becoming less and less helpful to him. He needed to enhance the power of the beast god weapon. Let's go. After circling around again and finding nothing missed, the two left the Tao arena. The arrangement of this place was peculiar. If not in a hurry, spending some time practicing here would actually be beneficial. After leaving the Tao arena, this time there was no dark and narrow path ahead, but a broad and majestic avenue. On both sides of the road stood grand white jade walls, and the road surface was paved with white stone bricks. It's a bit strange. Wang Yan's voice was somewhat nervous. A peculiar force emanated from the front, making people uneasy. It was the smell of blood. Jian Wushuang also sensed it. Feeling this aura, Jian Wushuang, on the contrary, breathed a sigh of relief. As long as there were no twists and turns, it was fine. Combat, he preferred it, because it was simple. After walking for a while, the aura became clearer and closer. Indeed, something suspicious was discovered. Dark red blood flowed under Jian Wushuang's feet through the gaps in the bricks. The power of that blood was peculiar, not the blood of cultivators. Jian Wushuang took out a bottle and collected some of it. Upon closer inspection, the particles in the blood were distinct, each one a miniature world. This indicated that the owner of the blood had a powerful physical body, at least not inferior to his own. It should be a transcendent physique beyond the seventh refinement. It was like gaining an advanced understanding of the opponent's strength. This scene made Wang Yan secretly admire. As a Tier 5 peak-level emperor who had lived countless years, he was surprisingly not as cautious as a junior. Be careful. The opponent's strength is not weak. Jian Wushuang's voice was heavy. The trials outside the Demon Sound Hall were guarded by Tier 6 emperors. Who knew what kind of monsters they might encounter here? The inheritance of the Demon Sound Hall was not easy to obtain. Speaking of treasures obtained, there weren't many, actually. The most valuable thing he gained after crossing the first bridge was 10,000 universe source stones. As for the owner of this Dao arena, he wasn't even a universe master. The harvest was not significant. It merely provided a clearer understanding of oneself during the contemplation of the Dao form. On the yet-to-be-seen second bridge, strange occurrences befell Jian Wushuang, causing a moment of unease. The two proceeded cautiously, slowing their steps. Ahead, the amount of blood increased, and the stench of blood grew more intense. As they walked, Jian Wushuang even faintly heard a gasping sound. However, this gasping sound, elusive and persistent, continued forward. Despite the increasing blood, the source of the gasping remained unseen. The blood was so thick that there was almost no place to step, and the two proceeded carefully, avoiding any unnecessary trampling. Looking ahead, they could only traverse the air because the blood had enveloped the entire passage. In the front, there was no space left for them to enter. The wide road was blocked by the blood. Just as Jian Wushuang hesitated on whether to force their way forward, Wang Yan's body suddenly burst, startling him. Not good. Wang Yan felt a hot and spicy breath blowing toward the back of his neck, frightening him to the point that cold sweat broke out. He quickly dodged and turned to look behind. The sight that met his eyes shocked him. Jian Wushuang, slower to react, also turned his head to where Wang Yan was staring in amazement. There was a peculiar creature with 9 heads, each different. Some were male and some female. They sneered at the two, sharp teeth protruding from their mouths, and the blood flowing out of them. Or rather, the blood was their true form. This is the Blood Demon, one of the 5 ancient demon lords, the Blood Demon. A figure similar to Shan Jun. Jian Wushuang stabilized his figure. Not only did he not move, but his divine body was pushed to the extreme, ready to risk his life at any moment to break through. As for the front, he dared not move forward even if he were beaten to death. But now, the retreat path was blocked by the 9-headed Blood Demon. The shock and fear filled Wang Yan's eyes. The two of them had been followed by such a creature all the way, and they didn't even notice it. Perhaps they encountered this thing from the very beginning when they encountered the blood. What should we do? Jian Wushuang dared not breathe heavily and conveyed through sound transmission. The front was simply impassable. Going forward meant certain death. Going back meant facing the 9-headed Blood Demon. A stalemate ensued here. They couldn't sense the opponent's aura. However, for someone who could be on par with Shan Jun, Jian Wushuang knew they were definitely not an opponent. We'll fight our way out? Wang Yan replied uncertainly. He was also frightened and unsure of what to do. Wang Yan knew less than Jian Wushuang. He was unaware of the origin of the monster in front of him. It had probably been silently following them for a long time, undetected. Its strength certainly surpassed theirs by a lot. Trying to break through was not very likely. Jian Wushuang shook his head. His suspended body slowly approached the wall, gesturing for Wang Yan to approach the other side of the wall. His intention was for the two of them to retreat along the wall. Although somewhat disoriented, now they could only step back and take it one step at a time. What if all of this was just an illusion? Jian Wushuang prayed in his heart, hoping that they could safely retreat. If they couldn't, then he would plunge into the blood ahead. Fortune favors the bold. Lust as he was stepping back. A voice shattered his illusion. It's the aura of Shanjun. Kid, what's your relationship with Shanjun? One of the heads among the 9 blood demons approached Jian Wushuang, greedily sniffing. The voice was sharp, and Jian Wushuang's ears buzzed. Upon hearing the question, Jian Wushuang dared not continue retreating. Originally prepared to escape, upon hearing the name of Shanjun, he suddenly had some room to maneuver. Senior blood demon. I have a close relationship with Shanjun, Jian Wushuang respectfully replied. On the side, Wanyan breathed a sigh of relief when he heard that Jian Wushuang could actually establish a connection here. However, the demon's next sentence directly made their hearts jump to their throats. Old 7, why bother with words? Since they're related to Shanjun, we must devour them, said a female head with numerous braids like hemp ropes on her head, her eyes waxen. Jian Wushuang cursed under his breath. Not good! Originally, he had thought of building connections, but now he encountered the mortal enemy of Shanjun. This might be a bit tricky. Senior, Wanyan wanted to say that he didn't even know who Shanjun was, but before the words could come out, sharp teeth bit into his neck. Similarly, on Jian Wushuang's side, his blood was being voraciously consumed by the demon. However, the two of them discovered that the blood demon could only devour their blood. Their divine bodies and origin sources were directly separated from their flesh, and the blood-sucking posed no threat whatsoever. Blood demons seemed oblivious, holding their flesh and chewing voraciously. Phew! So exhilarating, watching their flesh perish while they remained unharmed. Let's go! They exchanged glances, without much communication, and continued forward. With furrowed brows, they charged into the blood, relying on faint senses to guide them through the walk. Dao friend Wanyan, don't walk too fast. Jian Wushuang felt a phantom ahead, moving swiftly, so he transmitted to Wanyan. Wanyan paused, halting his steps, and expressed surprise. But I'm behind you. Upon hearing this, Jian Wushuang also froze. Wanyan was behind him, blocked by the blood. They could only rely on faint senses to detect each other as they moved through it. Wanyan was behind him, so who was ahead? Regardless, they needed to leave this place first. This time, Jian Wushuang accelerated, as someone ahead was exploring, making him more audacious in his movements. After not too long, they finally managed to leave this pool of blood. Phew! After taking a breath of fresh air, Jian Wushuang's divine body felt a bit ethereal. Finally, he had come out. Just as he emerged, a figure approached from the front, and a strong aura rushed toward him. Stop! Jian Wushuang angrily shouted. He retreated, pressing against the wall, and his physical body instantly recovered, startling the approaching figure. Jian Wushuang had a body tempered in the 10 trials, and both the origin source and the divine body contained the power of the physical body. Even if he completely lost his physical body, he could still recover. The reason he didn't immediately recover earlier was to prevent the blood demon from devouring him again. Now, facing the opponent's attack, he didn't hesitate. He directly restored his physical body and struck out with a punch. Crash! A loud noise sent the phantom attacking him flying. Wanyan, who arrived later and saw Jian Wushuang's move, was also nervous. He looked up at the flying phantom. Dongsheng! Wanyan exclaimed in surprise. Walking ahead of them was none other than Emperor Dongsheng, the first to enter the Demon Sound Hall. Puff! As Dongsheng, looking somewhat embarrassed after getting up, saw Wanyan and Jian Wushuang, he was astonished. It's you guys! The three reunited. They each recounted their experiences. Pretty similar. Their experiences were almost the same. However, Dongsheng, unlike the two of them, was not as miserable initially. After the bridge collapsed, he swam directly through the magma. He encountered a genuine desolate beast, and it was only through sheer luck that he managed to get through. This was also the reason for his surprise. Because of Jian Wushuang and Wanyan's strength, A 99% chance of perishing awaited anyone who tried to cross. Humph, the opportunities here don't seem all that impressive. Instead of straightforward, it's all twisty and turny. Looks like I've come to the wrong place this time. It seemed that Dongsheng hadn't obtained the universe source stone. Otherwise, he wouldn't speak like this. The reason they coveted the Demon Sound Hall was twofold. Firstly, because no one could enter, and secondly, when acknowledged by the origin source, the token rewarded contained the universe origin source. They had never seen such a scarce resource before. They were all stubbornly persisting, hoping to enter the Demon Sound Hall and obtain more of the universe origin source. In the river of time they were in, there was no universe master, and the universe origin source was only present in the original universe. However, the consciousness of the original universe was peculiar. It could nurture various treasures, but obtaining its origin source was extremely difficult. No one had yet acquired the origin source of the original universe. Jian Wushuang saw that this time he gained the most. Not only did his soul improve, but he also acquired tens of thousands of universe source stones. He felt that this place was quite good. Of course, compared to the Three Kings Court in the Western Sea, it was still far behind. Unfortunately, the Three Kings Court had fallen into the chaos of temporal currents. It was unknown whether it had been salvaged by Zhenling. If they had truly entered the temporal turbulence, it would have been a great pity. The Soul Steps and the Transformation Dao Steps were truly extraordinary. If brought out, their effects would surpass even those of the Demon Sound Mountain. Imitating the origin source of Myriad Dao was a great blessing in the school of Myriad Dao. Oh, by the way, Brother Wushuang, how did you restore your physical body? Dongsheng was somewhat curious. His own physical body was already strong enough, crafted after becoming an emperor. However, it was not comparable to the supreme physique, capable of resurrection with just a particle. Wan Yan also looked at Jian Wushuang, equally curious. He just didn't have Dongsheng's shamelessness to ask directly. After all, everyone had their own secrets. Jian Wushuang, however, was indifferent to this. His enemies were never these people, and there was nothing to hide. It's not like it was some secret opportunity. But this was also a small secret of his, which was actually insignificant in terms of his own strength. My physical body was once refined in the Demon Sound Hall. However, at that time, the Divine General Mayin had not yet appeared. There were some accidents during the refinement process, causing my physical body to blend into the origin source and divine body. As a result, even if I lose my physical body, I can recover it out of thin air. Jian Wushuang explained casually. The listeners were extremely shocked. Dongsheng also practiced the divine body path, and his physical body was also supreme grade. However, it had not reached the 9th refinement level, so he was extremely shocked to hear this. Actually, being able to integrate into the origin source and divine body is too miraculous. Qishan Temple is indeed extraordinary. I've never heard of such a refining method. Dongsheng's eyes were filled with admiration. He had a favorable impression of emperors who followed the divine body path, especially someone like Jian Wushuang, who had refined his physical body to such a powerful extent. They all thought Jian Wushuang was an emperor. Jian Wushuang didn't deny it. If he continued talking, these two wouldn't be admiring him. They would be jealous. All right, let's hit the road. Let's see what surprises the second bridge has in store for us. The two became three, and fortunately, the journey proceeded without any other peculiar occurrences. However, the blood demon's presence gave them quite a shock. They walked until the end, taking a month's time, finally laying eyes on a golden bridge. This time, beneath the bridge wasn't purgatorial lava but rather a mundane world. The Golden Bridge of Freedom. Ancient characters were inscribed above. As for what lay above the bridge, there was nothing. The more ordinary it appeared, the greater the dangers within, a fact they were all well aware of. None of them were novices. All were seasoned experts who had ventured through countless ages, having seen and experienced all kinds of worlds. Let's go up, Jian Wushuang said indifferently. There was nothing more to say. Instead of trying to decipher anything just by looking, it was better to go up and try firsthand. This time, Wang Yan displayed great courage and ascended the golden bridge of freedom without hesitation. As he ascended, Jian Wushuang and Dongsheng, who followed, noticed that once they entered the bridge, their figures disappeared. This indicated that the golden bridge of freedom was likely an independent space. Jian Wushuang didn't hesitate and stepped onto the bridge. The moment they entered, a warm sensation enveloped them. The scene ahead wasn't a purgatory but rather an earthly paradise. Walking on this bridge felt as though they had descended upon the mortal realm. Although underfoot was the golden bridge of freedom, his figure was immersed in the mundane world beneath the bridge. Various noisy sounds echoed in his ears without end. Jian Wushuang hadn't heard such sounds for a long time. There were commoners, wealthy and elegant people, as well as women from the brothels dressed in revealing attire. Jian Wushuang stood among these people, as if no one could detect his presence. What does this mean? A journey through the mundane world. Jian Wushuang's brows slightly furrowed. If that were the case, it would be too cliché, and he was not buying into it. A figure like Divine General Mayin wouldn't arrange such a mediocre trial. Yet here he was. There must be something peculiar about this. Jian Wushuang recalled his last experience crossing the bridge, which was intricate and bizarre. The entity who designed these 3 bridges was undoubtedly a powerful being who enjoyed traveling through the mortal world. This trial tested not strength but the state of mind and the power of the soul. Jian Wushuang began to step forward, advancing 1 step at a time. As he entered, he didn't feel anything peculiar about the place. Soon, he walked out of the golden bridge of freedom. He initially thought it was straightforward, but the moment he stepped off the bridge, the surroundings became increasingly realistic. And he himself began to change. Qingshan City, a small alley to the west of the city. Now, Jian Wushuang was a beggar, dragging a crooked stick in one hand and holding a broken bowl in the other. Although he walked off the bridge, he didn't reach the other side. Instead, he fell into this mundane small city. He had been in this place for 3 days. 3 days without a meal. Now, he was like an ordinary mortal or even worse than an average person. He couldn't even defeat the wild dogs in the alley. Jian Wushuang regretted it completely. This was simply torture. From start to finish, he couldn't discern the purpose behind all of this. It was somewhat better passing the first bridge. It had a slight enhancement on his soul. However, the enhancement was truly limited. Perhaps having experienced the soul steps, he looked down on these things now. But what was the meaning of this second bridge? To make him wander the mortal world? And then throw his soul into the body of a beggar? Wandering for what? He was getting a bit intolerant. Clang! Jian Wushuang tossed his only remaining bowl, smashing it on the ground. In the fenced alley, the inhabitants were all impoverished people. Seeing a beggar desperate enough to throw a bowl, some of them felt sympathy. Shopkeeper, give him 2 steamed buns on my tab. On the roadside stall, a middle-aged man without patches on his clothes, slurping a steaming bowl of lamb tripe soup, waved his hand to signal the stall owner to give Jian Wushuang 2 steamed buns. The owner of the stall was also a kind-hearted person. Not only did he give Jian Wushuang 2 steamed buns, but he also handed over a bowl of hot soup. It's better to be alive than dead. Eat up. This winter will pass quickly. Pow! Jian Wushuang forcefully pushed away the food offered by the other person, brandishing his stick, ready to give the person a beating. Get lost! Who was he? He was Jian Wushuang, the ultimate Tao Lord, the pride of the heavens. With the qualifications of a Tao Lord, he surpassed the peerless talents of the emperor. Did he need pity from others? Today, even if he starved to death or froze to death lying outside, he didn't need anyone's pity. You! The stall owner's expression darkened. He had never seen a beggar like this before. Even if the stall owner were a living Buddha, he couldn't bring himself to put a warm face against a beggar's cold buttocks. Humph! How ignorant! The stall owner walked into the house with an angry snort, ignoring Jian Wushuang. The middle-aged man slurping his mutton soup left some copper coins and, as he slowly stood up and passed by Jian Wushuang, said, "Young man, a restless mind is not good." However, Jian Wushuang sneered, finding amusement in their ignorance. Yet, the following words left him stunned in his tracks. If you don't even have the courage to survive in the mundane world, how can you face the universe? The middle-aged man's words lingered in the air. Without waiting for Jian Wushuang to react, the other party had already disappeared. The implication of these words was quite clear. The other party was no ordinary person. Divine General Maoyin? Jian Wushuang shook his head. It didn't seem likely. Of the three who entered this place, Wanyan and Dongsheng might not be in this city, and these two wouldn't pretend to be superior in front of him. Since they all reached this place, they should be like him, mere mortals. It wasn't Dongsheng, Wanyan, or the Divine General Maoyin. It seemed that there were others in this place, perhaps not human, but rather a consciousness left behind by the being who created this place. Although he didn't know who the other party was, Jian Wushuang couldn't stand that tone. It wasn't that he, as a rebel, couldn't stand being lectured by others. Mainly, was this trial necessary? Does enduring suffering really make one stronger? It could only be said that the creator of this place had a limited perspective. I'll survive. Today I won't starve to death here. Let's see what you can do. Jian Wushuang resolved silently. He refused to believe that he would perish of hunger in this place. Even if Divine General Maoyin didn't intervene, Zhenling would save him once he learned of it. A future ultimate Tao Lord, a peerless genius with the potential to ascend, dying of hunger in the mundane world. What kind of absurdity was that? Plop! Jian Wushuang found a threshold that looked comfortable and flopped down on it. Limbs splayed in all directions. This will do. Dying here wouldn't be so bad, Jian Wushuang self-mockingly remarked. Then suddenly, a wave of hunger struck. Enduring the hunger, Jian Wushuang sank into a deep sleep. As twilight descended, in the dim alley, the cold wind howled, and Jian Wushuang couldn't bear it. So he curled up. Whether it was instinct or his consciousness not being firm enough, he shrank back. Huff! Jian Wushuang abruptly sat up. Was his consciousness not firm enough? Even though he had become immortal, his consciousness was still intact. Why did he hesitate? With this thought, he stretched half of his body back onto the street. Woo! Unbelievable! Jian Wushuang shrank back, unwilling in his heart. When he fell asleep again, his body curled into a ball, instinctively tidying up his clothes and wrapping himself completely. Although his stomach kept growling, Jian Wushuang slept soundly. Perhaps because he hadn't slept for 3 days, he fell into a deep slumber. At some unknown point, Jian Wushuang felt his mouth dry, his throat as if burning with fire, and a pungent smell reaching him. A liquid flowed down his throat, and a hiccup woke him up abruptly. Cough, cough. Jian Wushuang coughed violently, weakly opening his eyes. Everything before his eyes had changed. Thinking he had returned to reality, he noticed the dirty and tattered clothes on his body, realizing he was still a beggar. Turning his head to survey his surroundings, he found himself in a simple yet cozy room. You're quite lucky. You didn't freeze to death in the snowdrifts, a woman's voice echoed. Jian Wushuang struggled to lift his head and saw a young woman behind him. Her face was heavily adorned with rouge, but her features were still delicate. Jian Wushuang's voice was weary. He wasn't thinking much at the moment. He just wanted a sip of water. Before he could speak, the woman twisted her waist and handed him a bowl of water. Gulp! He lifted the bowl and gulped it down, feeling refreshed and invigorated. It was the best-tasting water he had ever had, surpassing even the genius earth treasures he had encountered. Seeing Jian Wushuang catch his breath, the woman asked with an unfriendly tone, "You filthy beggar, what's your name?" Taking a breath, Jian Wushuang, with both hands supporting his body, leaned against the soft bed. He looked at the woman with a hint of hostility and replied coldly, "You're not worthy. Hey, you stinky beggar. I saved your life, and this is how you talk to me? Believe it or not, I'll throw you out to feed the dogs." The woman with heavy makeup threatened fiercely. Jian Wushuang paid her no mind. He had finally realized that he was afraid of death. Not exactly fear, but an intense instinctive desire to survive. preventing him from willingly embracing death. "You shouldn't have saved me." Jian Wushuang's voice softened. If she hadn't intervened, he would have frozen to death tonight. Now, having shaken off the chill from his body, lying in the warm bed, he actually felt like dying. He did not even want to move. The dusty woman, who was initially somewhat angry, sighed and complained after hearing Jian Wushuang's words. "Men, every one of you is trouble. You should all freeze to death on the streets." "I'm Jian Wushuang, and you?" he asked. "You can call me 13 Yang." The two exchanged names, a form of acquaintance. Subsequently, they chatted about this and that. Jian Wushuang, having emerged from the mundane world, wasn't completely ignorant. He quickly learned about the city of Qingshan and the peculiar 13 Yang. Her background wasn't favorable. Her parents passed away when she was young, and her own uncle sold her to a brothel called the Chuixiang building on the west side of the city. This marked her entry into the world of dust. This courtyard used to be her home, and after earning money in the brothel, she bought it. Normally, she wouldn't return. But today, she happened to be here due to something she shouldn't have come across. Taking a break and encountering Jian Wushuang. Fate is unpredictable, and it was such a coincidence that she saved Jian Wushuang, who was on the verge of freezing to death. "What did you just give me to drink?" Jian Wushuang curiously asked. 13 Yang was momentarily stunned, then replied, "Of course, it's the wine. Without that sip of wine, you would have frozen to death long ago." "Well, is there anything else?" Jian Wushuang swallowed a mouthful of saliva, his stomach also betraying him with a growl. "You, on the surface, look like a beggar, but your speech doesn't quite match. You seem more like a scholar who somehow ended up in this state." 13 Yang casually handed the wine jug on the table to Jian Wushuang, and she also tossed a roasted sweet potato his way. Jian Wushuang gulped down a mouthful of rough and strong liquor, picked up the somewhat hot sweet potato, and began to munch on it. After hearing 13 Yang's words, he mumbled, "You've got a good eye." He wasn't really a beggar before. If he revealed his previous identity, the other person would probably think he had gone crazy. In this mundane world, there was no concept of cultivators. With the sweet potato in his belly, he finally subdued the annoying little demon in his stomach. Having his belly filled and lying on a warm bed, Jian Wushuang felt incredibly content. Recalling the mutton stew from the day, he couldn't help smacking his lips. "Come on, tell me. Looking at your face, you don't seem like a child from a poor family. How did you end up like this today?" 13 Yang was quite curious. Once a woman's gossip fire was lit, it wouldn't easily be extinguished. Jian Wushuang hugged his head with both hands, gazing at the ceiling beams, and muttered to himself, "Well, it's hard to say. Should he talk about the matters of Qishan Temple?" It was too unbelievable. Introducing Qishan Temple to Immortal was like talking about celestial scriptures. Talking about things in the mundane world, it had to be from his own experiences, and indeed, he had some stories to tell. Jian Wushuang began to reminisce. The other person might have been just an ordinary mortal at some point in time. There was no need to fabricate stories to deceive them, especially in this desolate place. Now, in the deep of the night, with a jug of wine in hand, Jian Wushuang started recounting the events of his childhood. It was during his days at the Sword Pavilion. In that year, he was only 18, still just a young noble. In the flickering candlelight, 13 Yang listened intently, and the play of light cast a hint of red on her face. Jian Wushuang started narrating from the age of 18, recounting the grievances and entanglements of the Sword Pavilion. Of course, he downplayed some of the more mystical abilities, shaping the story like an extended martial arts novel. His story unfolded like an epic Wuxia tale. 13 Yang became more and more enthralled as she listened. In the blink of an eye, 2 hours passed, and outside the room, a faint light appeared, heralding the approaching dawn. It wasn't until the sun had fully risen that Jian Wushuang came to a pause. "For this story, I'll trade it for a jug of wine and a sweet potato. It should be enough," Jian Wushuang said as he climbed out from the comfortable bedding, limping as he walked away from the bed. 13 Yang, captivated by the tale, showed no signs of drowsiness and promptly exclaimed, "One saved your life. How do you plan to repay me?" "L didn't ask you to save me," Jian Wushuang said casually. Then he pushed open the door. Snow was still falling outside, forming a thick layer on the ground. A gust of cold wind struck, causing Jian Wushuang to flinch, but he pressed on, heading outside. 13 Ninag followed, watching Jian Wushuang's departing figure. Leaning against the doorframe, she shouted, "Hey! If you're about to starve to death, remember to crawl back." Jian Wushuang stumbled, nearly falling. This time, he wouldn't starve to death. He was going to hang himself. The taste of starving was too unbearable. Somehow, he became more and more like an ordinary person. It seemed like everything before was just a dream. Smack! Jian Wushuang slapped himself. To stay alert, he reminded himself that this place was just a trial of the Demon Sound Hall. He couldn't get too immersed in it. If he got trapped here, it would be foolish not to find a way out. Qingshan City. The reason it was called Qingshan City was because of a mine to the west of the city. Originally surrounded by green hills and clear waters, the area turned into a black mountain when the coal within the hills was extracted. It was this mountain that sustained the city. Most of the poor families living to the west of the city were engaged in coal mining. Jian Wushuang walked out of an alley and headed towards the mountain. Due to heavy snowfall, there were few people on the mountain, and he encountered almost no one along the way. Even if he did encounter someone, no one cared about a beggar like him. Jian Wushuang somehow found a hemp rope and a straight stick from somewhere. Limping, he ascended the mountain. The exhaustion felt while climbing the mountain was more taxing than traversing the Demon Sound Mountain. After a strenuous climb, he finally reached the mountaintop and saw the true face of Qingshan City. Chaos surrounded everything, except for the real appearance of Qingshan City. Looking around, not even a single blade of grass could be seen, leaving Jian Wushuang speechless. Was he supposed to jump off the cliff? On the mountaintop, finding no solace, he ventured towards the rear of the mountain, where solitude prevailed. The journey was deserted, but at least it offered tranquility. On the halfway mark of the rear mountain, a lonely, crooked tree stood somewhat sturdy. He took the prepared hemp rope, wound it around the crooked tree with caution, ensuring a secure tie. After a careful tug by hand to guarantee its reliability, he placed a stone, stood on tiptoe, and prepared to end his life. This scene was observed distinctly by an old man standing amidst the clouds. The young people these days, how ignorant! Was this the unrivaled pride of the Qishan Temple? Choosing to hang himself at the slightest setback? It was truly embarrassing. A figure in dark red descended, standing shoulder to shoulder with the old man, calmly watching the unfolding drama below. Let him die. Staying here is a waste. What are Lord Zhenling's instructions? The old man turned to the newcomer. The dark red figure was none other than Divine General Mayin. Frowning, Divine General Mayin spoke coldly. He has given up. Whether he stays or leaves makes no difference. Having said that, Divine General Mayin departed. Only the old man remained, standing there watching Jian Wushuang hang himself. Jian Wushuang's actions displeased them. What if he faced a little setback? Did that mean he couldn't endure a single day? Exhaling deeply, Jian Wushuang took his last breath of the mountain air. He was about to bid farewell to this world. Inserting his neck into the hemp rope, Jian Wushuang steeled his heart, kicked away the small stone beneath his foot, and instantly felt a suffocating sensation. He felt as if his entire head was about to explode. His normally unresponsive legs began to move on their own accord, an instinctive reaction. Crack! The tree branch couldn't hold, snapping under the pressure. Jian Wushuang tumbled down, the sensation of suffocation lifting as he gasped for the crisp air. In that moment, did Jian Wushuang comprehend something profound? Hope. Instinctively, he felt a glimmer of hope, a desire for survival. Was this the hope of starting anew? If he truly turned into an ordinary person, would that be the end for him? Then what would be the pursuit he yearned for? to become a formidable force that shook through the ages or to stand on the brink of the cosmos, perpetually suppressing everything, a single sword in hand, commanding the world. Jian Wushuang lay on the ground, gazing at the sky. The elder on the clouds above also observed him, shaking his head and abandoning any hope, turning away. El will survive. A subtle change occurred in Jian Wushuang's consciousness, shifting from initial despair to contemplating the beauty of the world. On the mountaintop, he reflected on the changes in his mindset since entering, his expression changing. When did I become so hesitant? Jian Wushuang furrowed his brow. His mental state was stronger than even the emperor's. Why would he waver? In the depths of the infernal purgatory, he feared nothing. Why fear the mundane world? However, this mundane city was indeed a purgatory, different from the molten rivers, as here the purgatory was of the heart. Descending from the mountain, darkness had already fallen. A day had passed without eating, and Jian Wushuang's stomach growled again. This time, he learned to accept leftovers thrown by others, that was not compromising oneself. Thinking about the words he spoke in the morning, he felt embarrassed to seek out the woman again, so he wandered within the city. Without movement, he'd freeze sooner or later. Glancing at his worn-out straw sandals, with his big toe still exposed, he looked pitiful. I'll need to figure something out. Jian Wushuang's eyes cleared. Now he understood what it meant to survive. It was harder than dying. A beggar, to survive, must have some skill. He headed towards the east of the city, the most prosperous area, hoping to find a means to sustain himself. This sustenance wasn't a job. He didn't even have a bowl to beg with. Arriving at the east of the city, there were plenty of charming streets, though some weren't suitable for him. Due to heavy snow, the streets were sparsely populated. However, the laughter emanating from the houses was more abundant than usual. Crack. In a dim alley, a short and thin man dragged a struggling woman. The woman resisted relentlessly. A slap echoed as the short and thin man fiercely declared, "It's all because of you, my streak of bad luck. If I lose money, blame it on you. Today, I'll sell you off." Jian Wushuang squatted at the alley entrance, watching the scene unfold without any intention of intervening, mainly because he thought that dealing with a woman should be no problem for this short and thin guy. No, something's not right. Jian Wushuang shook his head. His thoughts had taken a twisted turn. The short and thin man, gripping the woman's hair, dragged her through the snowy path. As he passed by, Jian Wushuang silently extended the stick in his hand and tripped the short and thin man, sending him face first into the snow. Ouch! The short and thin man's head hit the ground, and his teeth were knocked out. Nosebleeds streamed from his nose, and he released his hold on the woman, covering his nose. He turned to see a beggar laughing at him. Enraged, he cursed, "You beggar dared to trip me." Saying this, he swung his fist towards Jian Wushuang. Although nearly exhausted from hunger, Jian Wushuang had experiences from his mundane past, and his swordsmanship was quite agile. Even without a sword in hand, a 7-foot-long stick could serve as a substitute. A strike, not particularly forceful, hit the opponent's vital point, knocking the short and thin man unconscious on the ground. Finally standing up, Jian Wushuang looked at the woman sobbing on the ground. He spoke gently, "Madam, is your home nearby?" The woman didn't lift her head to look at him but pointed weakly down the alley. "It's cold outside. Let's go back," Jian Wushuang said, one hand grabbing the hair of the unconscious man and the other supporting the woman. On the ground, there were 2 distinct trails left behind. Having escorted the woman home, Jian Wushuang surveyed the dilapidated house before glancing at the short and skinny man he had in tow. "Is there clean clothing available?" Jian Wushuang inquired. The woman, now ceasing her tears, shifted her attention from her sobbing to the unconscious, scrawny man. The thought of him waking up tomorrow only to sell her again filled her heart with despair. Upon hearing Jian Wushuang's request for clothing, a flicker of hope crossed her mind. She retrieved a set of clean and tidy clothes from the worn-out wardrobe. Although patched in many places, the garments were remarkably soft, far superior to what Jian Wushuang was currently wearing. Here, the woman handed the clothes to Jian Wushuang, and as she observed his appearance, the towering stature, broad shoulders, and sharply defined features, she couldn't help but feel a sense of lament. How could such a fine man be reduced to a beggar? After changing into the fresh attire, Jian Wushuang took the opportunity to wash his grimy face. Finally resembling a presentable individual, he turned to the woman and spoke. "I'll take care of this man for you. Consider it payment for these clothes." It was evident that the two were a married couple. The skinny man's gambling habits had left them in destitution, and it was truly a hardship for them to end up in such a state while residing in what used to be an affluent neighborhood in the east of the city. To prevent further harm caused by the gambler, Jian Wushuang had no choice but to mete out righteous punishment. It had been a while since he had taken matters into his own hands in such a manner. Without waiting for a response, he dragged the unconscious man toward the exit. The woman on the other side, how could she possibly harbor murderous intentions? It's not good to say too much about it. Jian Wushuang dragged the man along, contemplating how to deal with this scum. Killing a person, that's too simple. But to kill someone and make others believe it's a suicide, that's crucial. As they reached the corner, they noticed an abandoned ancient well along the wall. Having an idea in mind, Jian Wushuang thought, it's normal for a drunkard to fall into a well on his way home late at night. To prevent the man from waking up and falling in again, Jian Wushuang hoisted the thin man to the edge of the well. With a sudden force under his armpit, there was a crisp cracking sound, and he tossed the man down. Splash! The well had no water, but it didn't matter. Let's consider it a fatal fall. Jian Wushuang clapped the snow off his hands, momentarily unsure of where to go next, shaking the 3 copper coins he had obtained from the thin man. In the mundane world, 3 copper coins could buy a few steamed buns, but this late at night, besides some taverns, there were hardly any places selling anything. Yet, with 3 copper coins, even a hot water drink in a tavern was unaffordable. Jian Wushuang glanced at his own attire, covering the patches. He could pass for a normal person. Thinking of this, he headed towards the tavern they had just passed. Outside the house, heavy snowflakes were falling, and the biting cold wind pierced through the air. Inside, however, it was warm as spring, accompanied by the aroma of delicious dishes. Jian Wushuang crossed his arms, covering the patch on his chest with both hands. As soon as he entered, a quick-witted waiter approached. "Sir, please come in." The waiter bowed respectfully. If the waiter knew that Jian Wushuang only had 3 copper coins on him, he might not have been so polite. This time he came for a free meal. "This will do." Jian Wushuang deliberately chose a seat near the window for easy escape. The waiter didn't say much, wiped the chair, and after inviting Jian Wushuang to sit down, he respectfully asked, "Sir, what would you like to eat?" "I'll have 3 pounds of cooked beef to eat here, cut another 3 pounds for takeout, and 2 pots of wine." Not only did he want to eat his fill this time, but he also had to plan for the next meal. After the waiter left, Jian Wushuang put down his hands, glanced at the window, tapped it lightly. The paper and wood paste didn't seem very sturdy, but it should be fine. The beef arrived quickly, freshly taken from the braising pot, emitting steam. Although Jian Wushuang was very hungry, he didn't devour the food to avoid arousing suspicion. After taking a sip of wine, making sure no one was paying attention, he began to use his chopsticks, enjoying the oily feast. With this in mind, he walked towards the restaurant he had just passed by. 3 caddies of beef, an amount most people couldn't finish, but Jian Wushuang managed to eat to about 70% full. Just as he finished, the waiter showed tactfulness and brought over a neatly packed portion wrapped in oil paper. "Get me a bowl of beef soup too." Jian Wushuang took the packed beef, wiped his mouth, and instructed. The waiter didn't question and replied, "Sure thing." As the waiter disappeared from his sight, Jian Wushuang stuffed the packed beef into his arms, lifted it onto the table, and kicked it towards the window. Although he was unmistakably an ordinary person, after eating his fill, his strength was not to be underestimated. With one kick, the window bore a hole, and through it, Jian Wushuang leaped out. This commotion attracted the attention of many. All eyes turned towards the broken window, leaving only a chilly breeze whistling through the gap. The innkeeper, dozing off behind the counter, was awakened by the loud noise, but Jian Wushuang was long gone. The waiter who served Jian Wushuang, carrying a hot soup from the kitchen, stood still in shock. It took a while for them to realize. Someone had dined and dashed. A few caddies of beef were worth little, but with the broken window, the cost to repair it could buy 10 caddies of beef. Go out and find them. If you can't find them, you won't get a single penny of your wages today. The innkeeper's tone was intense, not just for the meager money, but because someone dared to dine and dash in his inn, even daring to break a window in public. If everyone learned to behave like this, what would happen? Several inn servants, upon hearing this, rolled up their sleeves and grabbed their tools, heading outside to search. With footprints on the ground, they didn't need to search aimlessly like headless flies. Instead, they followed the footprints of Jian Wushuang all the way. As for Jian Wushuang, at this moment, he hadn't gone far. He was inside the inn's gambling den. He was well aware of the footprints on the ground and deliberately circled around before climbing over a wall and returning. At this moment, he was roasting by the charcoal fire in the gambling den, watching the gamblers placing their bets. 14 points, big. As the house opened, some were delighted, and some were worried. Darn it, lost again. It's been big for 19 consecutive rounds. I don't believe it. In the next round, I'll bet small, just on this piece of jade. A young man with red eyes slammed his family heirloom onto the table. The gambling den attendant, hearing this, laughed and scolded. Youngster, I think this jade of yours is worth only a couple of silvers. Are you really going to bet it? This is authentic white jade. My old man bought it for 100 taels when he traveled far and wide. How can it be worth only a couple of silvers? The young man's eyes were a bit red, thinking that the attendant was trying to deceive him. The gambling den attendant sneered. Humph. If you want to bet, then bet. If not, get lost and come back when you have 100 taels to spare. You, the young man, full of hot blood, was about to get physical. At this moment, Jian Wushuang stepped forward and stopped him. I'll buy this jade for 5 taels. Do you sell? Jian Wushuang, with a tall and imposing figure, taller than the average person by half a head, gave weight to his words. The young man turned to look at Jian Wushuang, hesitated for a moment, and then handed the white jade to him. I'll sell. Good. Jian Wushuang took the white jade, threw it directly onto the table, and said, I'll bet on a leopard. You can consider this jade being worth 1 tael. On the table, a thick piece of cowhide was spread, depicting various sizes, leopards, or points on it. Everything. Jian Wushuang placed a jade token on the leopard. If he won, it would be a 50-fold return. Ha! This brother is really generous, chuckled the gambling den attendant. However, the young man was a bit unwilling and said, Where's the silver? Isn't this all silver? Jian Wushuang took a sip of wine, pointing at the silver on the table. The young man said angrily, Are you fooling me? As he spoke, he wanted to make a move, but Jian Wushuang, like picking up a chick, directly held the young man under his armpit, rendering him immobile. Roll. Just now, the young man offended the gambling den attendant, but knowing that Jian Wushuang was not easy to mess with, the attendant did not stop rum. He just said indifferently, Fine, settle the matter. The other gamblers didn't care either. After all, they weren't robbing it for themselves. Rustle. Rustle. The sound of dice rattled. Jian Wushuang appeared calm on the surface, but he paid attention in his heart. He wasn't blindly betting. He had discerned the opponent's methods. Just now, he had observed for a long time. Whenever this gambling den attendant wanted to go big, he would deliberately move a bit when opening the bowl, and every time it turned out to be a big win. Controlling 3 dice with such precision showed the opponent's high level of skill. However, it couldn't escape Jian Wushuang's keen eyes. Roll. As the den attendant was about to tamper with the dice, Jian Wushuang pointed his toe, lifting a small stone directly into the opponent's crotch. Ouch! At the moment the gambling den attendant bowed, Jian Wushuang directly caught hold of him. At the same instant when the others shifted their gaze, he lightly touched the bowl containing the dice. The force was just right, and though the game hadn't started yet, the dice inside had already undergone a change. "Why don't you hurry up and start?" some gamblers couldn't help but shout. Feeling a fiery pain in his bottom area, the attendant cursed angrily. "What's the rush? Whoever just attacked me, I'll slaughter them." Amidst a flurry of curses and with no one admitting guilt, the casino attendant could only take the blame. But by this time, his hands had already left the bowl carrying the dice, making it difficult for him to tamper with them again. He could only grit his teeth and open it. 3 ones, a leopard, small. It really is a leopard. Jian Wushuang had let go of the young man. Seeing that it was a leopard, the young man exclaimed. The casino attendant quickly understood what had happened. He had been played by Jian Wushuang. However, lacking evidence to prove it and fearing that Jian Wushuang might expose his secrets, he could only admit defeat. After taking the money, Jian Wushuang casually threw a piece of silver, returning the white jade to the young man, and even gave him an additional 5 taels of silver. "Now we're even." Jian Wushuang tucked the money into his pocket and walked towards the door. The young man stayed in place for a moment, then, holding the silver, followed Jian Wushuang out. "Big brother, I want to become your disciple." In the eastern part of the city, amidst the fireworks and willow-lined lanes, Jian Wushuang accompanied the young man to this alley. "Big brother, today you don't have to worry about it. I'll treat," the young man said, patting his chest. It seemed that he was no stranger to such places. This young man, named Lu San, was a descendant of the Lu family in the eastern part of the city. Unfortunately, his family had fallen on hard times, his parents had passed away early, and he had been expelled from the family. In his grandfather's lineage, he was the last one standing. With no one to restrain him since childhood, he engaged in petty theft and mischief, either going to the gambling den or places like this. Jian Wushuang shook his head and asked, "Let's go to Xianxia building." "My treat." "Oh, big brother, are you also a regular at Xianxia building? Why haven't I seen you before?" The young man was somewhat surprised. Judging by Jian Wushuang's appearance, he thought he hadn't been to such places. But as soon as he spoke, he revealed himself as an experienced customer. Even the relatively obscure Xianxia building was familiar with such a reputation. Xianxia building, located in an inconspicuous courtyard, behind which stood a 3-story building that seemed a bit chilly compared to other brothels. However, in the eastern part of the city, Xianxia building was the most cost-effective brothel, with reasonable prices and distinctive women. But the particular characteristics of the women here made Jian Wushuang a bit uncomfortable. Lu San entered Xianxia building and skillfully groped a woman with lingering charm. "Hurry up, call your Xianxia building's top girl over. My big brother is treating today." Lu San patted his buttocks. Of course, he was patting the woman's buttocks. The woman smiled with a hint of playfulness and scolded. "You stinky kid, your hands are too restless." Saying that, she walked towards the inner room. Jian Wushuang turned his head and whispered, "Is this what you usually do?" "Yeah." Lu Sen nodded and replied, "Big brother, you see, we have all shapes and sizes, especially that Chui Hua. She's still my old lover, no less than the top, well, the top girl here doesn't seem that great." Jian Wushuang was somewhat speechless. He came here not only because of Lu San's enthusiastic invitation but also because the woman who saved his life yesterday was here. "Two young masters, please come in. We'll bring the women out to you shortly." Following the person, they ascended to the 3rd floor and entered a room adorned in pink. Through the window, they could still catch a glimpse of the snowy scenery outside. Seated on a plush rocking chair, Jian Wushuang felt quite content. In this mundane world, things weren't so bad after all. Soon, the madam brought forward the so-called top girl of the Xianxia building. When Jian Wushuang saw the appearance of the woman, he nearly spat out in disgust. Pointing at her, he said to the madam, "Is this the top girl? The one worth 10 taels of silver per night?" The madam was somewhat embarrassed. "Never mind. Consider it a gift. Jian Wushuang patted Lu Sanner's shoulder and then said to the madam, Do you have a woman named 13 Yang? Bring her here, and I'll take care of the expenses. Lu Sanner grinned. Big brother, so you have an old acquaintance here. The madam standing at the door felt a bit awkward and said, Young master, 13 Yang has already been reserved. How about I bring 2 other top girls for you? No, one wantna. One can pay more. After saying tnat, Annie tossed a dozen silver pieces onto the table. Seeing Jian Wushuang's persistence, the madam couldn't say much. After all, who could argue with money? Lu Santier leaned in, whispering, Big brother, that's over 40 taels of silver. What's it to you? Go enjoy your top girl. Jian Wushuang said impatiently. All of this was a charade. These ordinary people were just characters from a certain point in time. Once he left this place, it would vanish, and so would they. Now it's uncertain when he could leave. In this city, what secrets truly existed? Jian Wushuang tilted his head, gazing at the snowy scenery outside the window, feeling somewhat dazed. Beside him, Lu Santier clung to the leading lady, showering her with endless affection. Before long, the voice of the old madam outside the door brought Jian Wushuang back to reality. Young sir, 13 Yang has arrived. The madam pushed open the door, ushering in a woman clad in a thin red veil. After entering the room, 13 Yang adjusted her clothes and was about to cast a flirtatious glance at the guest in front of her when she recognized him and asked uncertainly, Stinky beggar? The old madam on the side was startled, slapping 13 Yang on the shoulder in anger. How can you speak to a guest like that? This young sir specifically requested you after declining the leading lady. That's right, it's me. Jian Wushuang revealed a slight smile. Seeing this, the old madam smiled, saying, Hee hee, you enjoy yourself, young sir. I'll leave first. Recognizing Jian Wushuang, 13 Yang, who was bold and fiery yesterday, now seemed a bit shy and blushed. Bang! A drunken man stumbled in, cursing as he entered. You damned bitch! Who allowed you to leave? Did one not pay you? Oh, fourth lord, this guest and 3rd Yang are friends. I just brought her here for a drink, and will leave soon. The old madam hurriedly stepped forward to mediate, but the other party obviously wasn't buying it. He slapped the old madam across the face without hesitation. Humph, a drink? Where can't I find a drink? The drunk, addressed as fourth lord, grabbed the old madam's hair, brought his face close to hers, and angrily demanded, I'm asking you, is there any wine here? 13 Yang was somewhat frightened, perhaps not wanting Jian Wushuang to see her in this state, so she directly ran out. The old brothel owner's voice trembled. Fourth lord. 1. How much did he pay? Jian Wushuang stood up calmly and asked. The drunkard looked at Jian Wushuang, a fierce light flashing in his eyes. Kid, do one lack money? You want to compare yourself with me? Do you know who I am? Crack. A wine jug flew out, directly smashing onto the drunkard's head. The blood flowed down his face directly. The one who threw the wine jug was Lu Sanner. He was a bit tipsy, swaying as he walked over, pointing at the drunkard and cursing loudly. Do you fucking know who I am? The drunkard, struck by the blow, instantly sobered up, holding his injured head. I'm Li Si from the city lord's mansion. If you have the guts, don't leave. Wait for me. Li Si left with a threatening remark, presumably going to get reinforcements. Jian Wushuang heard this name for the first time. He hadn't been in this place for long, so he didn't know anyone. On the side, Lu Sarver, upon hearing the name, seemed to be stunned for a moment. Brothers, you better leave quickly. The other party is the steward of the city lord's mansion. It's not something you can afford to offend, the old brothel owner advised. 13 Yang had already left. Staying here was meaningless, so Jian Wushuang, carrying the dazed Lu Sanner, walked towards the door. Big brother, we're finished. Lu Sarver held his head, squatting on a street corner. Li Si R's reputation was known to everyone in the eastern part of the city. He was the top lackey of the city lord's mansion, ruthless and vengeful, a fierce character who would settle scores. When you threw the wine jug, weren't you afraid? Jian Wushuang found it somewhat amusing. This bewildered youth was just too young. The two stood by the street, unsure of where to go. In this vast city, there wasn't a single place to settle. Because he had fought with Li Si, Lu Santier dared not return home and could only follow Jian Wushuang. To go to the city lord's mansion, which way should we take? Jian Wushuang, seeing that the other was genuinely frightened, inquired about the city lord's mansion. Lu Sar, dejected, said, "Just keep going along the next street. We'll get there. Let's forget about it for now and focus on saving our lives." Saving their lives? There really was no need for that. You go to the west side of the city. Wait for me in the fenced alley. I'll be there shortly. After saying this, Jian Wushuang took a brisk step and directly climbed over the wall. He wanted to arrive at the city lord's mansion before the steward did and wait for him outside. Since offense had been taken, it was either elimination or a future menace. Swish! Jian Wushuang's speed was fast. Though he was immortal, past experiences had taught him a lot. In less than a quarter of an hour, Jian Wushuang arrived at a corner outside the city lord's mansion. Looking at the snowy ground outside the mansion's gate, with no footprints in sight, he breathed a sigh of relief. Then he began patiently waiting for Li Si's arrival. Another quarter of an hour passed, but Li Si's figure was nowhere to be seen. Jian Wushuang felt something was amiss. It had been almost an hour, and there was still no sign of the other party. Is there another way out? But that shouldn't be possible. There was no movement inside the city lord's mansion either. Time to go! An ominous premonition struck Jian Wushuang, making him feel uneasy for reasons he couldn't fathom. Since he arrived here, he had become an ordinary person, so feeling uneasy was somewhat normal. Jian Wushuang reassured himself. The distance to the west of the city was not insignificant, and he didn't hurry on his way. When he reached the fence-lined alley, Lu Santier was waiting there. "Big brother, you finally came back. Where did you go just now?" Lu San curiously asked. Jian Wushuang waved his hand, gesturing for him not to worry about it, then spoke. "Let's find a place to hide for now, and we'll talk when it's daylight." Walking along, they arrived at 13 Yang's residence. Seeing the teaching materials on the snowy ground in front of the door about to be buried by the heavy snow, Jian Wushuang knew she must have returned here. He gently knocked on the door latch and saw that the light in the room was on through the crack in the door. Sure enough, not long after, 13 Yang opened the door for the two of them. Seeing that it was Jian Wushuang, 13 Yang was not surprised, because no one knew this courtyard belonged to her. "What are you here for?" 13 Yang showed half of her face. Jian Wushuang smiled and said, "To repay the favor." Then the two entered the courtyard. It was still the somewhat dilapidated small house. The two were silent, but Lu Santier spoke with enthusiasm. "Big brother, I didn't expect you to have this ability. There's a saying, how does it go? Keeping a beautiful woman in a golden house." Smack! Jian Wushuang slapped him on the head and laughed, scolding, "Shut up! Aren't you afraid now?" 13 Yang, sitting on the edge of the bed, was stunned for a moment and asked, "Afraid? Afraid of what?" Taking advantage of the opportunity, Jian Wushuang changed the topic and talked about their experiences after she left. 13 Yang burst into laughter when she heard that Lu Sanner had hit Li Si on the forehead. "Good hit. One never liked that jerk. If I had known, I would have stayed and given him another blow." Lu Sanner, seeing the situation, completely lost his fear. He nodded in agreement and said, "Heroes think alike. The next time I beat him, I'll make sure to call you." Jian Wushuang smiled without saying much. However, the uneasy feeling in his heart became stronger. Lu Santier and 13 Yang chatted amiably, but Jian Wushuang, though seemingly indifferent, was pondering how long these days would last. Currently, he hadn't figured out the purpose of coming to this realm, and he didn't know how to escape. Perhaps the answer was approaching. His instincts were usually accurate. Unintentionally, a thread of thought power emanated from the depths of his mind, a powerful force of will. Since coming here, He had completely detached from such sensations. Unexpectedly, today he accidentally accumulated a thread of thought power. Jian Wushuang felt a burst of joy in his heart and a greater sense of security. Don't underestimate this thread of thought power. It was enough to wreak havoc in the mortal world. Jian Wushuang firmly suppressed this thought power in his mind. Now was not the time to break free. He could use this power to explore the other party's intentions. He wanted to see what kind of purgatory this mortal world was. They chatted throughout the night. All of them were night owls and no one felt tired. The next morning, Jian Wushuang instructed 13 Yang to inquire about the affairs of the city lord's mansion, while he and Lu Sentier waited for news. It didn't take long before 13 Yang hurried back, holding a notice in her hand. Something's wrong. Someone is dead. Lu Sanner, sober now, became anxious again. He quickly took the notice, but he couldn't understand its contents. 13 Yang pointed upward and said, "El heard from others that last night, several waiters from various taverns were killed. The blood flowed down the entire street. Also, that person you offended, Li Si, is dead too. And his death was just like those people from the tavern." Well. Jian Wushuang now understood the origin of that unease. Everyone related to him had died. The waiters from the tavern were probably the ones sent to find him. Jian Wushuang couldn't be bothered to listen to the ignorant remarks and took the notice from 13 Yang to read it. This notice appeared too quickly. He was the one being wanted, and he wouldn't believe it if there wasn't someone who had arranged this beforehand. 2 patches on the chest. Jian Wushuang glanced at his own chest. Even such details were included. Killing 6 people. 1 steward from the city lord's mansion. 5 waiters from the tavern. But he hadn't done anything like that. Last night he did kill someone, but it was just a scum who sold his wife. What does this mean? Jian Wushuang crumpled the notice and looked up at the sky, saying coldly, "This method is too crude." His words were full of disdain. If this was all the mundane world's purgatory had to offer, then they were underestimating him. He might as well hang himself on the crooked-neck tree on Coal Mountain. "Big brother, are you okay?" Lu Sentier and 13 Yang looked at Jian Wushuang strangely, feeling like he was scared silly and talking nonsense. Jian Wushuang looked at the two and said, "You guys don't understand." He wanted to see how the planner behind this would react next. Now that he had a clue, he could always turn the tables when the time came. Above the clouds, the old man looked towards the mundane world, a smile on his face. "Humph, becoming immortal but still can't wash away the arrogance. Let's see how long you can stay proud." When the mortal world was severed from the mundane, it had already been cut off. But at that time, having ascended to immortality, they naturally didn't care about the hardships of the mortal world. If all these enlightened individuals were turned into mortals, experiencing the purgatory of the human realm, their arrogance would diminish. It was precisely this thought that led the old man to arrange this test. He wanted those cultivators to have a sense of awe in their hearts. This would bring great benefits in the future. Inside Qingshan City, the constables of the city lord's mansion were searching the streets for the murderer. The appearance of Jian Wushuang was known to everyone in the entire city. This time, the city lord's mansion had offered a sky-high reward. Anyone who could personally capture Jian Wushuang would receive 1,000 taels of gold, while informants would get 1,000 taels of silver. Not only were the constables searching, but even some idle street thugs were now looking for Jian Wushuang. For a moment, Jian Wushuang became the target of everyone. After all, just reporting useful information could earn 1,000 taels of silver, and it was worth noting that it took a year of mining coal on Coal Mountain to earn 3 taels of silver. In the courtyard, Jian Wushuang sat cross-legged along the edge of the room, his breath steady. The thread of thought power exerted on him remained suppressed deep within. For now, he wasn't in a hurry, and it hadn't reached the point of flipping the table. If that schemer truly provoked him, he would destroy the entire mundane world. The thread of thought power transformed into a small sword, capable of piercing through the void. Although it couldn't destroy the space, reducing this place to ruins was well within its capability. Lu Sentier and 13 Yang went out to continue gathering information. When they returned at noon, their faces showed signs of distress. "Big brother, did you really kill those people?" Lu Senti-er asked curiously. Jian Wushuang neither denied nor answered. At this moment, there was no need for explanations. It was as complicated as trying to explain mud stuffed in one's trousers. 13 Yang stood near the doorpost, sighing. "Stinky beggar. I never thought you'd become so valuable one day. 1,000 taels of gold. How can you say that? If it weren't for you, Big Brother wouldn't have killed Li Si." Lu Senti-er exclaimed angrily. Jian Wushuang now harbored suspicions about these two individuals intentionally getting close to him. When he survived the suicide attempt and was saved by 13 Yang, he had harbored doubts. If not for the trace of thought power within him, he would have silenced these two a long time ago. Of course, armed with this hidden advantage, he preferred to let things unfold naturally and see what tricks the schemer had up their sleeve.